You have a great day as well, my man. Stay out of trouble. God bless. Should be able to hear me, eh? Hey, yo, let's go. Everything sounds fine. I'm changing the win percentage down to 69%. That's a pretty good number. Done. We should be able to do this now. We should be able to throw in all of it. Hi, stall. Be careful. That's all your points. Rick D, be careful. No! I just changed it to 10K. Or 100K. Wait, what exactly are points? You get them from watching the stream talking?
It had been a sweltering hot day on Friday, August the 28th of 2020. It was nearly midnight when 22-year-old Leslie Palacios and 25-year-old Eric Rangel Iberra pulled into the parking lot of the Longhorn Casino.
I have a 0 point. No. I just lost over fucking 7,000 points right there. Fuck.
Located in Whitney, an area once called East Las Vegas, the Longhorn Casino was built in 1989 and caters to visitors and locals alike seeking fun and gambling in a more low-key atmosphere. The two move inside and head to the Chuckwagon restaurant, passing by the slot machines and other gambling opportunities.
Sorry.
She's a nursing student just months away from graduation, and he's a young man very interested in the date and what it might bring. The two settle in for a nice dinner and each have a number of alcoholic drinks with their meal. Really, it's nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, neither of them seem inebriated after their meal, walking back out, once again avoiding the slot machines as the locals often do. Leslie is carrying leftovers home in a bag, and Eric seems to be familiar and a trusted companion. She, because of the pandemic regulations, is wearing her mask. Eric has apparently forgotten to put his back on, making it easy to recognize his face. The two walk out into the parking lot. Their dinner has taken about an hour and a half. It is now in the early hours of Saturday morning. The two have an animated but apparently friendly conversation as they return to Eric's truck. She walks around to the passenger side of the truck and Eric gets in the driver's side.
I bet she's asking her to come back to his place right there. He's like, come on, girl, what's wrong? You ain't coming back to my place. I just bought you dinner. What the hell? What you mean you ain't gonna suck my willy?
For a lot of folks, the date would end there. But in a town that runs around the clock, the night is still young, and, of course, the couple is too. They head off down the road to their next stop, Putter's Bar and Grill on East Charleston Boulevard in Las Vegas. The couple arrive.
I don't think I've ever been on a date before where I just go from bar to bar to bar to bar. That seems like
around 2:15 a.m., about 20 minutes after leaving the Longhorn parking lot. The two have more drinks and leave some point later. No one working at the bar that evening could be sure exactly what time the couple left. Once again, while most folks may have called it an evening, the young couple kept their night on the town going. Their next stop would be one of the locations of the Bourbon Street Sports Bar. There, the two would be seen spending more time together, drinking beers and taking shots of tequila. Finally, after spending hours out and drinking, the two did finally call it a night and head back to Eric's home. The two get home just before sunrise as they're seen pulling into the street in front of the place Eric lived around 5:30 a.m. Leslie is showing the effects of heavy drinking, and now Eric has to help her from the car. She has a lot of trouble walking, and Eric helps her into the house. The two still seem to be getting along. Inside the house, Eric takes her up to his bedroom. The home is owned by Eric's father, Jose Rangel, and his mother.
I say, Eric, you're looking pretty rough.
Lives there as well. Jose has plans to take his wife on an event at their church that morning, but he's not fully up and active at this point. No one really sees the couple come in. And then something goes terribly wrong as the two end up in bed. Terribly, irrevocably, and fatally wrong.
This guy's voice.
Before we begin, we would like to send our deepest sympathies to the family and loved ones of Leslie Palacios.
See, this is how you make a fucking true crime video, bro. Don't be throwing ads halfway through that shit.
Life was blossoming. By Saturday afternoon,
shout out to the kid that throws ads halfway through that.
Worried because she never came home from her date. Her mother, Araceli Palacio, and her sister, Nayeli Palacio, contacted the Las Vegas Metro Police Department and told them that Leslie had not come home from her date the night before. They said they had been trying all morning to call her and to text her, but there had been no responses. The last communication her sister received from Leslie had been a text from her phone number that simply said, "I need to tell you some shit." Araceli's reply of what happened was never answered. Then, Metro Police Department did something that police departments and law enforcement agencies across the country are quickly phasing out. They told them they needed to wait 24 hours before declaring her missing.
I've never understood that. Why do you have to wait 24
hours? Was a rule of thumb or a guideline widely followed.
They literally have a TV show called The First 48 where they specifically say the first 48 hours are like the most impeccable hours of a fucking, or not even impeccable, they're like the most important, hours of any crime. And then it's just like, oh, no, you gotta wait 24 hours.
Cell phones, or even had access to landline phones in every home. The one-day wait rule would give people a chance to wander back home after either finding roadside assistance, getting over an argument, or whatever that had taken them away from their home in the first place. Over time, the law enforcement community realized that the policy wasted vital hours in the search for actual missing persons, oftentimes with tragic results. As cell phone use grew and ease of contact, final straw for the poorly conceived policy, and almost all departments now have a policy of investigation at the first report of a missing person.
Give me a sec, I'm going to fix the audio in a second.
The person's family and friends would be the best to judge whether the person was actually missing, won out over the manpower and yet, in this case, the Palacios family were asked to wait. And so they did, but not without trying to get in touch with Jose Rangel by phone to check and see if he knew what the couple had gotten into. He never answered. The family then tried to call Eric's sister, but again, no answer. They even went down to Rangel's home, but no one came to the door to answer it. They returned to the home an hour later, they said, and saw Eric's mom and sister loading some furniture into the back of a truck, but were unable to talk to them.
Yo,
The following day, with Leslie still missing and not replying to any
they're loading
communication
furniture into the back of the
attempts,
truck,
they
so their
again
family's covered in
contacted the
dog.
police, this time opening a missing persons case. They informed investigators on what they knew about who she had gone out with and what little they knew of their plans.
Man, I gotta wait for
Somewhere
my fucking
in the
vape to
department,
charge.
at another
I just
desk
wanna
on
get
August the
slow.
31st, members of the Metro Police Department were taking another missing persons report, this time for two men, a father and son, Jose Rangel and his son Eric Rangel Ibarra.
Bro, those are fucking like identical.
It took until September
One's
the 1st
just older than
for
the other. Look
officers
at that.
with the missing persons
Identical.
department to match the two cases.
Holy shit.
Especially
That one guy on the
with
left's got bigger
Palacios
ears.
family naming
That's
Eric as Leslie's date. A Bolo or Be on the Lookout report went out. Officers headed to the homes of the Palacios family and the Rangels, homes that were only a few blocks apart. The families had known each other for almost 15 years. Canvassing the area around the Rangel home on Tipper Avenue, officers were able to identify a security camera that would have looked down on the family's property. They were quickly able to obtain access to the videos taken by that camera and rewound the video until they had unmistakable proof that something terrible had happened. What had been two missing persons cases quickly became one case for the Metro Police Department's Homicide Division.
Prosecutors say video from the morning of August 29th shows 25-year-old Eric Rangel Ibarra helping 22-year-old Leslie Palacios, seen here alive, get out of his truck and into the house. An hour later, in video we've blurred due to its graphic nature, the same camera catches Rangel Ibarra and another man, who prosecutors believe is his father, 46-year-old Jose Rangel, dragging a lifeless body from the home and into that same truck. Minutes after, the truck drives off, leaving Rangel hosing off the walkway.
And now, both Jose and Eric are missing. Their family left behind have no idea where they are, but officers now know that the Rangel home is a crime scene. Warrants were obtained. Officers and forensic
You shouldn't even need a
team
warrant
members
after
go
like
through
seeing
the
them drag a
home
dead
to
body
find
out of the
what would be
fucking house.
described
Like,
later
that's so
as an
stupid.
attempt to clean up the place, perhaps unwittingly attempting to remove the evidence of a murder. As alert bulletins went out immediately with descriptions of the two men and of Rangel's pickup truck, including...
It's because he's 5'5". You know? I guarantee you that's why. He's 5'5". She hurt his ego somehow. Oh, no, oh, dude. That's what I get, you know? That's what I get for being a fucking smart ass talking shit.
Of the two men and of Rangel's pickup truck, including the license plate number. Investigators went room to room in the small two-story home, documenting the evidence still there. Las Vegas Metro Police Detective Mitchell Dorsch would later tell a grand jury that there were numerous pieces of evidence found at the scene of the Rangel's home. On the living room couch, a pair of blue latex gloves were found. Another set and numerous cleaning supplies were also found in the adjacent dining room area. Inside a mop bucket in the kitchen was a stained cleaning cloth, and the mop head showed signs of a dark substance as well. Upstairs, the scene of Eric's bedroom looked like it had been torn apart bit by bit, and items had been moved around. Suspiciously, the fitted sheet had been removed from the mattress and was nowhere to be found. There were a couple of dark stains on the mattress as well that caught the attention of investigators. Inside the room, they also found a preferred customer card which would prove to be registered to Eric. Nearby, a shirt on a hanger, one of Eric's. It also had blood drops on it. Eric's wallet was found in the room. No money, but all of Eric's IDs were still there. Investigators also checked in the bathroom and found 2 blood spatters on the floor and took samples of them. The source of the spatters is still undetermined. As investigators combed through the Rangel home, arrest warrants were sworn out on Eric and Jose. Local media outlets flashed up the announcements alerting the public to be on the lookout for the two men, showing photos of both and including images of how they would look in surgical masks that nearly everyone was wearing at the time during that phase of the pandemic. The warnings came out too
Hey,
late
there you
to catch
go.
Eric and Jose, though. The notices did catch the attention of a friend of Eric's, though, and he had some very important information for local investigators. The man explained that he had known Eric for about 5 or 6 years, and the last time he had seen him in person was weeks before. Eric had come into a restaurant where the man was eating, and Eric was obviously very intoxicated. He sat down and asked the man if they were friends, and would he do him a favor in the future if Eric asked him to. The man said it was an awkward request, and that he had humored Eric, obviously because he was drunk. Eric left, and the man didn't think about it again, until the morning of Saturday the 29th. The man said he got a call from a telephone number he did not recognize. When he answered it, it was Eric, and Eric immediately reminded him that he promised he would do him a favor. He was calling in that favor. Eric said that he needed to bring him some gasoline, and he couldn't find any himself because he didn't want to be seen anywhere on camera. The man asked him why, and Eric told him, according to his testimony before a grand jury, that Eric claimed he was in Utah, some 125 miles north of Las Vegas. The request was crazy and it didn't make sense. Why did he need someone to bring him gas from so far away, and why was he using a different phone than his usual one? Eric, who was obviously stressed out, told him he was on a burner phone. And then he said the words that would turn the missing person cases and the strange occurrences into the worst possible situation. "Because I killed a bitch," Eric told him. He then repeated it when his friend said that he didn't believe him. "I'm for real. I killed a bitch. I'm serious. She's dead in the back seat of my truck right now." The man wanted nothing to do with the situation, and he told Eric that he had to go pick up his daughter that morning and couldn't help. He then said he told Eric that he'd screwed up by telling him what he had told him. Eric immediately hung up the call. The man went to the police when he saw the reports on the local news. Eric, meanwhile, headed back to Las Vegas, apparently. He met back up with his dad, and the two took off for parts unknown. They told no one where they were headed, told no one what had happened, and seemed to leave no trail behind them. No debit card transactions, no cell phone pings for their phones, no witnesses calling in to say they had been spotted. They vanished like a pair of ghosts, leaving Jose's wife and daughters behind without any explanation. It would be September the 9th before Leslie's body would be found. Members of the Moapa Tribal Police, Red Rock Search and Rescue, and investigators from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department discovered Leslie's remains in the Moapa Valley near the Valley of Fire State Park, roughly 60 miles from Las Vegas. The location was a few miles east of Interstate 15 on the Valley of Fire Highway, about 2,500 feet down a dirt road. Her remains were hidden behind a bush located in a wash. Investigators would later tell a grand jury that the body had suffered terribly from the heat, turning black over the intervening days. In addition, it had suffered considerable damage from insects. Identification was initially made by matching the clothes that Leslie was seen wearing in the date-night videos, a striped top and blue jeans, to what was found on or near the corpse. Leslie's body was found without pants, and her underwear had not been put on correctly. According to the detective who was part of the recovery team and who had attended the autopsy, her thong-style underwear had been put back on her, as if the thong portion had been the waistband on the underwear. Her pants were found nearby in another bush. The body was taken to the state laboratory for testing and an autopsy to confirm the cause of death. Due to the ravages of the desert and the high temperatures, coroners were unable to determine the exact cause of death. The day after her body was found, Leslie's family, friends, and members of the community gathered for a memorial service for the young woman. It was a heartbreaking end to any hopes that she may have been found alive. As for Eric and Jose, they were gone, effectively disappearing. There were no reports about them being seen anywhere. And then, on January 19th of 2021, just over 3 months later, Jose Rangel turned himself in at the U.S.-Mexico border crossing. Officials from the San Ysidro Border Patrol Station near San Diego, California, arrested him immediately and contacted the authorities in Las Vegas. Jose would waive his Miranda rights and would waive any extradition fight. He wanted to come home to his family. All he could say about Eric was the two had split up in Mexico and he hadn't heard from him in months. Investigators said that Jose was cooperative from the very beginning of their interviews, but originally gave a story that was watered down to lessen his involvement in the case. Once confronted by the security camera videos, he recanted his original story and opened up more to the officers. Jose said that he had been up early that morning and had been working in the home's garage. He had plans to take his wife to a church event in a couple of hours and was taking care of some things when he heard Eric and Leslie enter the house and stumble up the stairs. He said that a half an hour later, Eric came down the stairs shirtless, dragging Leslie's body behind him on a bedsheet. Jose said Eric told him that she had overdosed and died. Eric then completely lost his senses and started telling his father that they had to do something with the body. Jose said he immediately helped Eric get the body out of the house so that his wife and daughters would not come downstairs and be involved. He would continue by saying that when he looked at Leslie, he could see no obvious injuries. There was no blood or vomit on her, and she was only partially dressed with no pants and her panties pulled up awkwardly around the waist. He helped Eric put her into the car and immediately grabbed the water hose and started spraying off the gravel outside as his son drove away with the body. He told investigators that he had not consciously been attempting to destroy evidence then, but was just stunned and trying to do something. He said he thought Eric was heading to Utah with the intention of destroying the body. Distraught, Jose went to his other daughter's nearby home to speak with her. Shortly after he arrived, though, he said Eric turned up at that house as well. Jose had not expected to see Eric back that day, and Eric began acting crazy, shouting that he was going to kill himself, or Jose, and that some people might be coming to kill the family.
That's
he
great.
said he chose to flee with his son, and the two
I'm charging my
home,
thing so I can
gathered
take a
all
tow.
the cash they could and headed to California,
ain't charging
and
quick
then
enough.
crossed the border into
Whee!
Mexico by that evening. During the drive, Eric refused to talk about what
Chillin',
had
bro.
happened, except that Leslie had overdosed on narcotics, and he had
Chillin'.
way too much to drink
Charging
that
the
night.
bong, charging
In
the
the
bait.
end, guilty to destroying evidence and an accessory to commit murder, both misdemeanor charges. He spent 205 days in the Clark County Detention Center before coming to trial. He would be sentenced to a
Reckless Town,
total
what's
of
up?
2 years in jail for what he had done. The 205 days already served would be counted against that sentence as time served. The charges and light sentencing he received would be decried throughout the community and even within the district attorney's office. Chief Deputy
Been a while,
District
been a hot
Attorney
minute.
John Giordani would tell members of the press that the Nevada
How
legislature
you been?
needs to do something about this because dumping a young girl's body and treating her like a piece of trash should not be treated as a misdemeanor. And assisting a murderer after he commits such an egregious crime should not be treated as a misdemeanor. Leslie's family would also speak to the press about Jose's sentencing.
Si alguien sabe de estos criminales, por favor que se entrieguen.
I don't know what you're saying, sweetheart.
Justicia, porque los van a encontrar a donde se vayan, que se entrieguen. porque
Anything new with me? Same shit, different day, bro. Living life, you know?
muy buena, estaba
Out here, living life.
estudiando, graduada.
You know how it goes?
Honesto, porque la familia o el pobre, de que me la hayan matado, porque yo no voy a descansar hasta no hacer justicia, que todos ellos paguen todo. Porque ella fue como mi mejor amiga.
Madre mía.
Decía esto que le hicieron. Ella era muy buena niña y una mejor amiga.
Fuck, I wish I could understand
Y que paga
Spanish,
por lo que
man.
le hicieron, porque ella no se merece esto. Y que lo trajo tapan a toda su familia, al papá, a todos, porque ella no se merecía esto. Ella era muy buena persona.
Time in jail, he had taken a number of courses mandated by the state that allows offenders to reduce their jail times.
What?
His release stirred up bad feelings within the community. He was now a free man. His son, Eric,
8
was
months,
still
bro?
out there,
Damn.
walking free and unpunished
That man
for
did
what
8
had
months in
happened
jail.
on that fateful night and the next morning. He has been the subject of 2 nationally broadcast television specials, but no solid evidence has turned up. Reports that he has been seen both in Chihuahua State and Durango State in Mexico, but so far he has managed to avoid the authorities there. Leslie's family continued to make pleas to the community for any information that would put this case to rest and bring Eric to stand before a judge.
We always think about her all the time. Like, there's not a day, that goes by that we don't. Everything reminds us of bring yourself in, because there's no way of hiding out anymore.
What's playing in the background?
You can't hide
You mean the
forever
foreground? Or
and just,
what, the
pay
game?
for what you did, because we're not gonna stop
The game or the video?
until we get justice.
He is still a very wanted man, and if you have any information as to his whereabouts, please contact the Nevada State Police by calling 755
Bro, I fucking stopped this.
684 2644.
Just some
We
true
may
crime
never
bullshit.
know the It was a near-perfect spring day as 50-year-old Jennifer Dulos loaded her children into the family's 2017 Chevy Suburban and took them to school. She rushed right back home because she had 2 doctor's appointments
some
in
true
New York
crime
City,
bullshit.
one at 11 a.m. and the second at 1 p.m. Depending on traffic, she should have plenty of time to get home, gather her stuff, change cars, and head out. She made it home, but that's where her trail ends. From there, Jennifer Dulos, mother of 5, going through the extended trials and tribulations of a messy divorce, just disappeared. Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the family and loved ones of Jennifer Dulos, a loving mother of 5 and a devoted daughter who was taken from those who needed her very much. She would never show up at the doctor's office, and when her nanny arrived at the house with the kids in tow, there would be no sign of Jennifer. The Chevy Suburban was not in the garage, and the 2014 Range Rover that Jennifer had planned to drive to the city was still there. A personal friend of hers arrived at the home just minutes later, and the 2 adults quickly called the police to let them know she was missing. Police were on the scene by 7 p.m. that evening. Jennifer was rarely late and hadn't messaged anyone about any delays. She was not answering calls. They knew they had a good reason to worry for Jennifer's safety, as they were familiar with how contentious the divorce had been going and how violent her former husband, Fotis Dulos, was supposed to be. Let's take a moment to look at the marriage and divorce of Jennifer and Fotis Dulos. Fotis Dulos was a Greek man who immigrated to the United States in 1986. He would graduate from Brown University, a private Ivy League school, and go on to receive a master's degree in business administration and finance from Columbia University. He married in 2000 and then divorced in 2004. The same year, he founded a real estate development and construction company, the Four Group Incorporated, that concentrated on high-end homes and other projects. Jennifer Farber, a 1990 graduate of Brown University herself, would go on to earn a master's degree in writing from the New York University School of the Arts. Jennifer came from a well-to-do and well-connected family, her aunt and uncle having founded the Liz Claiborne Incorporated fashion company. The 2 would meet at Brown University alumni events and eventually fell in love. Fotis, however, was still involved with his first marriage. The 2 would marry just 1 month after the divorce from his first wife was finalized. Jennifer and Fotis would make their home in one of the more posh neighborhoods of Farmington, Connecticut. They would have 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, including 2 sets of twins. Fotis's business would flourish, and the family would be very busy with outdoor activities, particularly water skiing. By 2012, Jennifer would begin telling friends that the marriage had troubles, and after a vacation in 2017, it seemed that Fotis had decided to give infidelity another try, this time with Michelle Troconis, a somewhat younger woman originally from Venezuela.
What's up, gamer?
Jennifer had been down this road before at the beginning of her own relationship with Fotis. In court papers and recollections from friends, she said that she began moving things out of the family home and preparing to leave the cheating man. Everything was kept secret, especially her knowledge of the affair, for as long as possible to keep him from getting suspicious. Over the years, she would claim, Fotis had become more controlling, and threats of violence were becoming less and less uncommon when she would have arguments with him. Finally, one day, she packed up the kids and filed for divorce. She would end up renting a home in nearby New Canaan, Connecticut, and began the slow, long slog through the courts to dissolve the marriage and their sizable shared wealth. The custody battle between the two for the 5 children would become extremely contentious, with supervised visitations being required as Fotis became more demanding. The loss of his children was turning anger into hate. Did it turn into something murderous as well? Now that we've looked at the environment that had developed between Jennifer and Fotis Dulos, let's return to her apparent disappearance on May the 24th of 2019. Officers entered the home of Jennifer Dulos in an effort to see if she was somewhere within the house or to find any clues as to her whereabouts.
Oh! I fucking barely just got out of the way of that. Oh my god. I was lucky. The officers, led by New Canaan Police Department Officer Thomas Patton, entered the 6,000-square-foot, 6-bedroom, 9-bath home on the ground floor, through the garage, and into the family's kitchen area. Searching throughout the first floor, nothing seemed out of place. There were no signs of any kind of a struggle. On the second floor, they found much the same situation. The family's bedrooms and belongings appeared to have not been affected, and there was still no sign of Jennifer. The unfurnished basement also turned up nothing as they searched. Returning to the kitchen area, the officers noticed a large handbag on the floor between the door, the garage, and the kitchen counter, like it had just been dropped off as someone came in. Within were papers and one of Jennifer's jackets.
Alright, I've located that vehicle. It is parked on the side of the road on Lapham, approaching town.
Bro, that basement looks creepy.
I
My
have a
police have a
secondary
basement
plate
that
for you
looks
run.
exactly like
Ready?
that.
Connecticut.
My cousins used to walk me downstairs in the basement shop. They like to try and scare me.
Perhaps she had brought it in when coming to change vehicles before heading off to New York City and her appointments. But she hadn't changed cars. The Range Rover was still in the garage and the Suburban was still gone. The police officers went back out to the garage and looked around a bit more closely.
His wife did something, but drive first. Dry edges, wet center. Yeah, when he just called in, he had a lot of scuffing.
Headquarters 27.
There's some back here too. Is there? Yeah, down here too. On the lower portion of the car. And it looks like it's been buffed or scraped or scratched all down through the driver's side. Well, it's just strange in connection with the fact that we've got a missing person, or potentially a missing person. You know? Yeah, scrapes on this side too, but there's no blood near them, so whatever they hit went down this side of the vehicle. Especially because like this, it's like a pattern here. You know what I mean? It's clothing. Right, not fur. But there, it's up here too. It's hard to get any of this. These cameras are. We should get better cameras. Hopefully this is getting it though. Right? Usually if you hit a deer and there's blood in your car, you take it to the car wash and get it cleaned. Especially a Range Rover. Let's see if there's any damage.
Zeno?
I mean, this is grandma's car, so you never know.
What's up, bro?
As they photograph what could be potential evidence, other officers are in the area looking out for the missing Suburban in hopes of finding Jennifer. At this point, they are pursuing this as a missing persons case, but their questions about blood found on the Range Rover would eventually become very important. Forensic teams would take samples of the blood found on the vehicle and further find some small flecks of blood on the kitchen faucet. Over the following hours, forensic team members would identify numerous tiny specks and spatters of blood. Traces were found on the Range Rover's hood, bumper, tire, and rear fender. More blood specks were found on the door leading from the garage into the mudroom on the door's interior knob and plate. In the kitchen, beyond the specks that were found on the faucet, there were additional ones found inside the under-sink cabinet door. More tiny blood specks were found on the garage door and inside of the garage's east wall. All of these samples were sent off for DNA testing. If they were shown to be human and Jennifer's, the tiny amounts found and the otherwise spotless nature of the area would mean that someone may well have cleaned up a crime scene, thoroughly but not completely. An hour after police began investigating the blood found on the Range Rover, Jennifer's Suburban was found abandoned at Waveney Park, some 3.5 miles away. There was no sign of Jennifer. There was a real possibility that something very bad had happened to the 50-year-old woman. It would not take long before detectives turned their attention to Jennifer's ex-husband, Fotis, who lived about an hour and a half away in Farmington, Connecticut. Fotis was asked to come to the police station and did so on May the 25th, 2019 at 2:47 p.m., where he was met by Officer Patton of the New Canaan Police Department and Connecticut State Police Detective Christopher Allegro. According to the men, Fotis asked the two men if there had been any information about Jennifer's disappearance and was informed that they were seeking help in the investigation. Initially, Fotis seemed willing to help, but his attorney quickly shut down any chance of an interview with him. When asked to see his telephone, Fotis initially agreed again, but then it was taken back by his attorney on his advice and required the investigators to obtain a warrant before they seized or examined it. The investigators had to wait until about 8:50 p.m. that night before the warrant was given. They then retrieved the phone from Fotis, as well as a second one he owned. What investigators would learn from Fotis's telephone would begin painting a picture of a horrible crime. Investigators found that on the day of Jennifer's disappearance, Fotis's phone pinged off of locations going to and from a job site earlier that day, and then spent the vast majority of the day at his home at Jefferson Crossing in Farmington, Connecticut, an hour and a half away from Jennifer's last known location. The information alone would seem to put him out of question as being involved in her disappearance, except that it then showed that evening he went out and traveled to Hartford, Connecticut, some 15 minutes away from his home. Once again, nothing particularly unusual in that, except that the cell tower pings seem to point out that he stopped at some 30 or more locations in and around town in a very apparently random pattern. It was suspicious enough, considering his relationship with Jennifer, that investigators began canvassing the area and obtaining surveillance camera footage from the locations and times matching those stops from his phone history.
Throwing out garbage bags. Throwing out some evidence, boy. Gotcha, bitch.
It showed Fotis and Michelle Traconis going about town, pulling over and dropping bags of trash here and there. Many, many bags of trash. It seems that he would go out of his way to pick high-traffic locations to drop the bags. In one instance, Fotis can be seen in video propping up what would turn out to be a WeatherTech cargo liner sized for a Chevy Suburban against a building, while Traconis leaned out of the door of the truck and slipped something white and rectangular through the grate of a storm drain at the curb. Police and investigators swarmed into Hartford, and with the help of local police, they were able to recover the contents of the trash receptacles and fish out what had been dropped into the storm drain. What they found under the grate was an old FedEx mailing envelope containing 2 old, out-of-date license plates whose numbers had been modified. Those 2 license plates had once been registered to Fotis Doulos. Trash bags were recovered across the area, and what investigators found within them was horrific evidence. Bloody rags, cleaning items, zip ties, and finally, pieces of women's clothing, bloody, torn, and cut. And at least in one bag, rubber gloves were found, bloody on the outside, and with every chance that someone's DNA could be on the inside. It was all sent off for testing at the state's police laboratories. They would come back with confirmation that the blood was from Jennifer Doulos. There was no sign of Jennifer, though. No corpse had been found, and no murder weapon either. If Fotis and Traconis had been disposing of evidence in the disappearance and probable murder of Jennifer Doulos, then what were they to make of the alibi for most of the day that Fotis had based on where his phone was? Once again, surveillance footage from security cams provided the answer. Investigators watched hours of footage offered up by Jennifer's neighbors, and they saw what might have been the explanation. Videos showed that around 8:05 a.m., Jennifer could be seen driving her Suburban into the driveway of her home, returning from dropping off the kids at school. She would not leave again until 10:25 a.m., but the driver could not be seen. This would have been far past the time she would have needed to leave to make her doctor's appointment in New York. At 10:29 a.m., the Suburban was seen heading southbound on Weed Street, leaving the area and apparently heading to a park where the vehicle would eventually be found abandoned. At 10:38 a.m., Jennifer's phone rings one last time from a spot near 200 Lapham Road in New Canaan. At 11:09 a.m., her phone completely leaves the Verizon network. At 11:12 a.m., Fotis is seen on camera driving down Merritt Parkway, leaving the area where the Suburban would be found. He is seen driving an older Toyota Tacoma pickup truck, one owned by an employee of his company, Powell Guminade. That truck, now that they know to look for it, had been seen driving into and out of the area of Jennifer's home on 3 occasions, and on 3 occasions would be seen pulling into Fotis's driveway that morning.
Is that vehicle turning into the driveway for Jefferson Crossing?
Yes, that vehicle is turning the driveway for Jefferson Crossing.
Okay, is this the video clip you sent to the police?
That's one of them.
I'm going to stop it there briefly, sir. Is this the video that you sent to the police as well?
That is one of them, yes.
And why did you send this clip?
Well, as I said before, what we knew on the...
I'm going to hit play.
In July, what we knew, based on the media reports, it was different.
Objection. The fact that there were these reports is one thing, but I was getting to what he learned in the media.
Well, the question was essentially, what's the reason you sent these videos to the police?
Based upon that interaction I had with Fotis on the 26th, based upon the fact of what we had learned from the media at that point in time, the visits to North End, I had 2 cars leaving in tandem, which was not consistent with normal vehicle movement patterns.
And you've lived at that residence for how many years at that point?
9 years.
Now, you indicated you were familiar with the vehicles and the vehicle patterns.
Yes.
Do you recognize this vehicle, the red truck?
Yeah, that's Pavel's truck.
And what about the vehicle behind it?
Well, that vehicle is that's a GMC Yukon XL. That was a rental.
A neighbor of Fotis's would notice something on his own security camera recordings that seemed terribly out of place. On that day, on 3 occasions, smoke came from different chimneys at Fotis's house. Temperatures that day were very spring-like, in the mid-50s to low 60s with very little wind, not the kind of weather that you would have someone lighting up fireplaces for warmth. Investigators quickly matched the arrivals and departures of the Tacoma pickup truck with each of the smokestack events. Powell was quickly interrogated, and in exchange for immunity, he told them that Fotis had borrowed the old truck from him.
All right, chat. I gotta go let my dog outside. I'll be right back, okay? Don't you guys go anywhere. I'm talking about you, little man. Let's go. Get going. Get going. There you go. Yes. All right, we back. Bro, when is this thing gonna charge me?
Fotis had returned it to Powell that afternoon. He brought it back completely cleaned, inside and out. He also advised Powell that he needed to sell it quick while the truck still had some value. The following day, he told Powell that he needed to make sure to change out the seats in the truck since they were so worn out. When Powell said there were no good replacement seats for the truck at any local junkyard, Fotis told him to go and remove the seats from a wrecked Porsche Cayenne that he owned and replace them with those. He needed to do so in a hurry, though, and dispose of those seats. Investigators now had plenty to go on when it came to building their case that Fotis had committed murder. A scenario emerged wherein that Fotis had entered the area on a bicycle and laid in wait for Jennifer to come home. Once she had arrived, he snuck into the garage and attacked her by surprise once the garage door was closed. He killed her and then did a thorough job of cleaning up the crime scene. He then drove the Suburban away and abandoned it at the park where he had stashed the Toyota Tacoma. Investigators had motive, opportunity, and a lot of physical evidence, but they did not have a body. The bloody clothing came back with her DNA on it, and there was no way anyone could have survived losing that much blood. She was dead, and there was no questions in their mind as to who did it. But his phone records showed that his phone had been at his house for the time in question, and the phone records showed an incoming call had been taken on it during that critical period. Investigators immediately figured that Troconis had held the phone that day and had taken the call to cover for him. Except when she was brought in for questioning, she said that she hadn't done that and that her own phone records backed up her story of taking her daughter to school and then making a couple of stops in town. On June the 1st of 2019, Fotis Doulos and Michelle Troconis were arrested and charged with tampering with or fabricating physical evidence in connection with the case. Both pled not guilty and made bail. The investigation and the search for Jennifer's body continued. Two men walking the property of a private hunting and fishing club in Connecticut one cold spring day came across something completely out of place. They would later tell police they had found a trench dug in an out-of-the-way place on the tract of land that was about 6 feet long, 2 feet wide, and 3 feet deep, covered with a set of grill grates. Inside the trench was a blue tarp and 2 large, unopened bags of lime. Later that month, one of the 2 men who had come across the trench had begun wondering what they had stumbled across and did it have a connection with the disappearance of that woman in New Canaan. They went back to the spot, but this time found that it had been filled in and covered over with leaves and brush for concealment. He immediately contacted the authorities. Teams carefully uncovered the spot, but found no corpse within. The man also told them that he had been told that one of the founders of the club, a former member, had been asking about getting access to the property just before the trench had been found. The man, he said, had been given a key to the property, but had given up seeking membership not long after the woman's disappearance. The man, he told them, was Kent Mawhinney, a local attorney, one who had been a longtime friend and business associate of Fotis Doulos. On August the 13th, Michelle Troconis was brought back in and interviewed. During the interrogation of Troconis, they found that she admitted to seeing Mawhinney in the 4 Group's office within the home that day, and that he had apparently taken a call from an old friend of Fotis's from back home in Greece. She said she didn't know much more about it than that, though. Investigators realized there was a scenario wherein Mawhinney had held the phone at the residence that morning while Troconis went out, providing not just an electronic alibi for Fotis, but also reinforcing it by taking an international call from Fotis's friend. Had the men not come to police about the found trench and the story mentioning Mawhinney's name, no one could have reasonably placed him at the Fotis home on that day. They had found the linchpin that would pull the plot completely apart. On January 7, 2020, police moved out and served arrest warrants on Fotis Doulos, Michelle Troconis, and Kent Mawhinney. Fotis would be charged with murder, while Troconis and Mawhinney would face conspiracy to commit murder charges. All 3 would be charged with destruction of evidence. Bond for Fotis was set at $6 million, and he was released later that day. He was scheduled to return to court on February the 28th of 2020. Troconis would also post bail with a return date of August the 6th, 2020. Mawhinney would make bail in October of 2020. On February 28th, Fotis Doulos' new girlfriend, Anna Curry, showed up at court and told Fotis' lawyers that he would be following along in a few minutes. Time went by, and Fotis never arrived. With court looming, his attorneys attempted to call him, but to no avail. Officers were dispatched to his home to find out what had happened. They came across him sitting asphyxiated in the passenger seat of his car inside the home's garage. Officers immediately dragged him outside and began performing life-saving measures on him as the ambulance arrived on the scene. Inside the car, a note would be found that read, "I refuse to spend even an hour in jail for something I had nothing to do with." There had been talk that on his court date, bail could have been rescinded, sending him back to jail to await trial. Fotis would be airlifted to a nearby hospital and then on to one that had a higher level of trauma care. He would die 2 days later. At the time of his death, he had been facing bankruptcy with nearly $7 million in debt and had been trying to sell the home he had built and was living in. The main suspect in the disappearance and the assumed murder of Jennifer Dulos could no longer stand trial. It would be 4 years, almost to the day, that Michelle Troconis would see her own case come to trial and stand for her part in the conspiracy. Over 27 days of testimony, prosecutors showed the video evidence of Troconis and Fotis disposing of the trash bags in Hartford. They even showed footage of an apparently homeless man sorting through one of the trash bags before the police arrived. The homeless man, when later interviewed, said that he found 2 small pillows in the trash, but put them back because they were covered with blood. 2 camping pillows had been identified as missing from Jennifer's garage. Prosecutors then brought out the items found within the trash bags retrieved from around town. Items they would prove to not just belong to Jennifer, but were also covered in her blood and sometimes the DNA of Fotis Dulos as well.
Sergeant Duggan, is this the item that you pulled out of the garbage of Albany and Green on May 30th, 2019?
It is.
Now, with respect to...
Yo, Jack, what's up?
First of all, what is it?
That's a bra.
The back of the bra is collapsed. Was it like that in the condition when you found it?
That's exactly how we found it.
And with respect to the front of the bra, is there a cut going down the middle of it?
There is.
Approximately where, please?
Right in the center.
Chilling, bro. Just chilling. Waiting for this fucking thing to charge up so I can pick it up.
If you can, sir, if you could point out. And would that be a little off center on the left side, over the left breast area?
Yes.
Thank you.
Nice, Sean, nice.
Sir, if you could take a look at the screen behind you. Is that a photograph of the shirt that you took out of the garbage on May 30th, 2019?
It is.
Is that the back or the front?
I believe that's the back.
Do you wish to say? You can continue.
The front was cut.
The front was cut? Can you show the next picture, please? Thank you. Sir, is that the front?
It is.
I'm going to show you. If I may, sir, can you please point to where the shirt is cut?
It's almost right down the center of the shirt.
Are there any buttons or zippers on the shirt?
No.
Sir, do you recognize this item?
I do.
What is it?
That's exhibit number 502A. That's what was a clear poncho with blood-like substance.
It was a clear poncho?
Yes.
So with respect to the poncho that I'm holding, up here on, I don't know if you can see it, sir, but on the top it looks like there are cuts.
Yes.
Was that in that condition when you seized it that day?
Yes.
And there are, I guess, numerous markings and things on this. Do you know what that is?
No.
Do you know which part?
Oh, some line crime.
No, when we took it out, a lot of it was wet, so it was just leaking everywhere.
Thank you.
Got
In
it.
effect, because Fotis could not stand for trial, to prove Troconis was involved in conspiracy to commit murder, prosecutors had to make a strong case that Jennifer had been murdered, that Fotis had in fact killed her, and that Troconis had worked in conjunction with Fotis to plan it out and cover up the murder. Numerous witnesses were brought in to testify about the relationship Troconis had not just with Fotis but with his children, and how her relationship with the man's ex-wife was. They painted a picture of a woman, a mother herself, fiercely loyal to her man and angry about how he was being treated in the custody battle. Those would pale in comparison, however, to the strength of one piece of evidence secured not from Jennifer's home, but from the home shared by Fotis and Troconis, written scripts the two had made to keep their stories straight.
What?
Within, the two had worked out the details not of the murder plot, but instead of how their alibis would be structured and how they could cover for one another. If one was supposed to be somewhere at a specific time, the other would be able to verify it. And in all the initial questioning, they held to those scripts almost verbatim. In the end, after closing arguments were made, after Michelle Troconis declined to take the stand in her own defense, the jury came back from their deliberations on Friday, March the 1st, 2024, and delivered a judgment of guilty on all counts. Sentencing will follow later, as will the trial of Kent Mawhinney. It is cold comfort that the murder of Jennifer Dulos has been solved. Her 5 children are now living with their grandmother, and they will carry a heavy, heavy burden they never asked for the rest of their lives. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. Sometimes a serial killer will strike and then lay low for a year or more before killing again. Others will travel from city to city, state to state, staying one step ahead of those hunting them. Some kill in sprees, rushing to pile up victims before local law enforcement finally catches them. But what if one was simply hiding among an uptick of violent crimes and homicides in a city, shielded by statistics and a society becoming too used to street violence? That may well have been what happened in Anchorage, Alaska in the summer of 2016.
I actually know who this killer is. We just watched a video on him the other day.
Drags a blue-wheeled trash container behind him. Where is he headed? A woman out for her walk. Her thoughts are on seeing her daughter later that evening. Here is the path where the two worlds would collide, and when they do, it will be catastrophic, and no one saw it coming.
We gotta do exclamation point, duel.
Before we begin,
at,
we would like to send
Shawnee
our
Boy,
deepest sympathies to the loved
420.
ones of Lindsay Burback, who fell victim to the abominable
Gotta do
acts
exclamation
described
point,
in this case.
duel.
47-year-old
space, the name
fitness
of the
lover
person,
Lindsay Burback from Accrington,
and
Lancashire,
space,
England, loved to go for a walk
number you
or a
wanna duel.
run. She'd been doing it for years and loved staying healthy and active. So, on August the 12th, 2019, she headed out around 4 p.m. to get in a walk before her daughter, Sarah, and her boyfriend were to come by for tea at 6 p.m. She started her walk down Burnley Road and then over to Peel Park Avenue, heading towards an area known as the Coppice. It's a wooded area with walking trails in Accrington. Lindsay had gone there many times to get a walk in, so she didn't feel concerned about it as she was on her way. Why would she, when the place was often visited by people with their dogs, families playing ball, and older residents out for a walk or fresh air? There had been another female walking around the coppice at about the same time Lindsay was heading in that direction. Her name was Zoe Braithwaite. She was enjoying her casual summer walk, but she suddenly noticed a male with a dark hoodie and warm-up pants on. He had his hands deep in his pockets and was walking on a path close to the one she was on. He was alone and looked really out of place to her. Maybe it was more of a feeling than anything else, but he was acting really odd, as though he was looking for something, as if he was sizing her up. Her senses heightened as she noticed he was closing the gap between the two of them, and he was doing it all too quickly. She felt her anxiety rise and suddenly broke into a run, moving away from him. Zoe wanted to put as much distance between them as possible. She frantically looked for other walkers as she started down the hill. But when she looked back, apparently she had startled him away when she broke into her run, and he had quickly fled in the other direction. Zoe was very lucky that day. She did not realize just how lucky she was until weeks later. The male hadn't left the area at all. He was hiding and watching for someone else to come along. And Lindsay had just walked into the coppice a few minutes later. At 4:30 p.m., Lindsay's phone quit working. No calls or messages would come in or go out. It had either been switched off or broken, but it hadn't been by Lindsay's hand.
She said, I'll see you at 6. Love you. And that was the last time I saw her.
By 6 p.m., Lindsay's daughter, Sarah, and her boyfriend were standing outside of Lindsay's door, knocking but not getting an answer. Lindsay's car was still in the driveway. Sarah had forgotten her spare key at home, so there was no way for them to get in. At around 6:30, a strange-acting young male walks out of the coppice onto Burnley Road. As a matter of fact, it was the same one Zoe Braithwaite had encountered earlier. His jacket was unzipped, chest bare, and the knees of his track pants were wet, as if he may have been doing something strenuous other than a walk or a run. He's captured on CCTV footage as he exited. It would again show that over the next hour and a half, the strange young man would make 2 trips past the camera that covered the area of the coppice. At 6:55 p.m., he was seen on camera carrying a knapsack. He was then seen at 8:28 p.m. pulling a blue trash bin on wheels, headed towards the Accrington Cemetery 4 minutes away. Sarah Burbeck had sent her mother several texts with no responses. This was out of character for her mother. There was no way she would change plans without calling or texting, and Sarah was growing very worried as the minutes passed. At 11:45 p.m., she and her father returned to Lindsay's residence with a spare key. Sarah had called her father with her concern about Mom being gone and not responding to calls or texts. When they arrived at the home, they searched through the whole house, but no one was there. Everything appeared to be normal. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was disturbed. At 12:11 a.m., August the 13th, 2019, Tim, Lindsay's ex-husband, would call the police, telling them that his ex-wife was missing. An investigation was quickly begun. Tim had met Lindsay in her early 20s on a night out, and it was him and her from that point on. They got along fantastically and enjoyed spending time in each other's company. After years of dating, the two decided to get married.
So you were tall, dark-haired, stunning, you know, just everything.
Tall, dark hair,
I liked.
stunning.
When she agreed to meet me again, I thought, winner. We got married 3 years after we'd been together.
Then came along their wonderful children, Stephen and Sarah.
Stephen, born June 2000. In October 2002, Sarah was born.
One of the outstanding things about Lindsay was that she was a special needs teacher's assistant to children at the Eighton Hill Primary School in Burnley. She worked hard at helping others because she enjoyed it. It meant something to her to be able to change someone's life for the better. Her job couldn't be any more rewarding to Lindsay. Professionally, the work was satisfying, but her private life was a bit different. Things had started to change in her and Tim's married life. They weren't as close as they had been before. Sadly, after 20 years of marriage, they had started to drift apart. Eventually, talk of divorce would work its way into the marriage, and they would separate from each other.
How the fuck can you divorce someone after 20 years? I just don't
drifted
understand
apart. What I wanted in life and what Lindsay then wanted in life were two different things. The conclusion was we'd split and get divorced.
Even though divorce had been inevitable, Tim would remain close to the family. He and Lindsay got along well, and Tim was always there when they needed him for anything. They may have decided to live separate lives, but they would always be a family, and Tim would watch out for Lindsay whenever she needed him, just as he was doing on August the 13th, 2019, when Lindsay went missing. People came from all over to help in the search for Lindsay. They met in the coppice to organize searches. This would include help from dog handlers with canines used for tracking. The Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service also was involved, and volunteers with experience in search and rescue added their skills to the search for Lindsay. Many others from the community were willing to give of their time and stepped up to help. Even drones and helicopters were used to search the coppice and surrounding areas. Others worked on the social media angle, and other volunteers made flyers to hand out and place throughout the borough. The police even released the CCTV footage to television of Lindsay walking the route that she took onto the coppice on that fateful day that she went missing.
All right, I'll be right back.
CCTV that showed
grab a
Lindsay
glass of water,
walking
man.
down.
Well, my PC's gonna explode. I got a new PS bro. Yes. Jesus, man. Care if you're playing World of Warcraft, man. I love it. Chat. When can I smoke, man? Fuck, this thing's still charging, dude. Holy fuck. Chat, check out this hat. I want you, I need you so bad.
Burnley Road, and we know she turned off onto Peel Park Avenue, and that leads to the entrance to the coppice. The coppice is a large hilly area. It's got lots of pathways, it's got lots of trees, it's got lots of foliage. We knew from the family that Lindsay would quite often go running there and would run for miles, and she'd often go walking there. So everything from Lindsay's background and the CCTV was indicating that could be where she'd gone.
As August the 19th passed, it would mark 1 week since Lindsay had disappeared. At the moment, she was still considered a missing person, but every day that came and went would dash the hopes that Lindsay might be found alive.
Seeing Stephen and Sarah going through it, when it
money.
was,
Shawnee don't lose,
the
man.
kids, you could see it in their eyes. They're broken. Everybody were. Have a minute.
I'm the only one that loses that shit, I swear.
August the 24th, 2019, Morgan Parkinson was out walking his dog at the Accrington Cemetery when suddenly the dog cut and ran towards a wooded area that was tucked away at the side. Parkinson shouted for the dog to return, but she ignored his commands. When he located the dog, she had her head in the cluster of bushes and was sniffing at something interesting to her. Parkinson moved closer and stepped on something squishy and jumped back. He grabbed the dog by the collar and pulled her with him. It was then that a putrid smell hit his nostrils.
Squishy?
The smell of something rotten and decaying hung heavy in the air. It was a naked body that had been wrapped in clear plastic and placed in a shallow grave, with loose foliage covering it in an attempt to conceal it. August the 24th, 2019 at 7 p.m., Lindsay Burbeck had been found. A missing persons investigation had now turned into a murder, and that investigation was officially launched. Local authorities secured the scene and collected evidence, and they sent the remains off for an immediate autopsy. Pathologist Dr. Naomi Carter told investigators there had been an attempt to cut off Lindsay's right leg. This would have been post-mortem after death, possibly in an attempt to dismember the body. It had been done with a saw. Dr. Carter found evidence of saw teeth marks in the deep laceration that had been cut to the bone and the kneecap. Had the killer been trying to cut up the body for better disposal, but failed?
Yeah.
Lindsay had been deceased for quite some time, so it was hard for Dr. Carter to determine the exact injuries as the body was so badly degraded. A body left out in the elements for 12 days would naturally be bloated from natural gases as the organs decomposed, and the color of the skin would go from green to a reddish color due to the blood decomposing as well. Dr. Carter could not rule out any sexual activity due to the decomposition, but Lindsay's fingernails were still intact and could possibly have DNA evidence left by the killer.
The pathologist who ultimately examined Lindsay's body wasn't able to rule out there being sexual activity, and I wonder if it was sexual activity the killer was initially seeking as opposed to murder. To me, the murder itself seems to be a byproduct of the killer wanting to engage sexually with a woman.
A thorough investigation did reveal significant force had been used to fracture Lindsay's neck, especially to get the crushing damage that was done to the throat area and larynx itself. When the neck is fractured, it can come from severe compression. This can either be through stamping on the neck, severe kicking, or kneeling hard on the victim's neck by the assailant. If there is enough force from stomping, then the neck can break at the C1 juncture, known as a Jefferson's fracture, or at C2, the hangman's break, and the spinal cord can sever. This is called a ligamentous separation of the spinal column from the skull base, and life will cease within a few seconds. Investigators found a yellow-handled saw and a pair of green-colored gloves where Lindsay was located. The items tested positive for blood. The outside of the gloves had Lindsay's DNA on them, but the insides of the gloves contained DNA from an unknown individual that had never been entered into the system. A pair of Skechers athletic shoes, the kind that Lindsay was wearing, were found in a blue plastic bag. Oddly, the soles of the shoes had been cut off and then thrown into the dumpster at the cemetery. The rolling blue trash bin was found, thoroughly analyzed and examined. It was swabbed for trace evidence and positively confirmed that DNA found inside was from Lindsay. Hair had also been found inside, which belonged to Lindsay. As with any murder, the family is always looked at and questioned first. They are the closest to the victims and could have reason to want the victim removed from their life. Lindsay's ex-husband was the first to be looked at.
Well, obviously, the police were asking me the questions because I'm the ex-husband. So, like I say, you'd have to be a fool not to think that you're being looked at.
Tim Burbeck was thoroughly checked out by the police. He had an alibi and was seen by others and eventually cleared from the investigation.
There was nothing whatsoever to show that Tim Burbeck could have been involved in Lindsay's disappearance, and actually we
He
can
seems
show
to actually
he was
really
elsewhere
love her,
throughout the time when Lindsay went missing.
Now the police needed to move on and look at all of the evidence they had collected. It could lead them to the real killer of Lindsay Burbeck. As police continued their investigation, one of the officers that had reviewed the CCTV footage found that cameras had captured something that was quite shocking. First, Lindsay is picked up on the camera as she is starting her afternoon walk. Then there is the video of a young male pulling a blue rolling trash bin behind him. He was headed to the coppice. All this was occurring in broad daylight, but going unnoticed by people walking by. Then the wheeled bin is brought to the cemetery by the young man. Sometime after that, the young man is captured on video leaving the cemetery and heading away from the area. He was empty-handed. 16-year-old Rocky Marciano Price.
16.
His parents had named him after a well-known boxer. He lived with his dad and mom and 5 siblings in the Winnie Hill area of Accrington, a place they had called home for almost 3 decades. Rocky helped out on his family farm, especially taking care of the chickens, which he loved to do. Other things he also enjoyed were watching films and playing computer games, things that normal kids would like and be a part of. But Rocky wasn't considered normal to those in the outside world.
Rocky was clearly somebody with challenges and with some health issues around autism.
Mild autism, learning difficulties. He didn't go to mainstream school. He was not academic. Some of his teachers said that he was non-verbal or didn't speak a lot.
With a below-average IQ of just 65, a diagnosis of autism and ADHD had changed all that. Rocky would become a student at one of the alternative schools for individuals with special educational needs. His teachers described him as quiet and almost nonverbal most of the time. They had never seen any aggression in the boy, nor had they witnessed him becoming angry either. He had been evaluated by a psychologist in 2015. The boy had difficulty identifying emotions in others and expressing emotions of his own. Rocky had never had any run-ins with the law or any reprimands from officials. He just never got into trouble. He was quiet and reserved and kept to himself. Yet, as stated earlier, on the 12th of August 2019 at around 6:30 p.m., Rocky is captured on CCTV footage exiting the coppice on Burnley Road with his jacket unzipped, chest bare, and the knees of his track pants were wet. He didn't appear agitated. He looked like he had just been doing something other than walking. He made 2 trips to the coppice at 6:55 p.m. Rocky was not panicked or flustered. He just sedately walked away from the coppice after allegedly murdering Lindsay Burbeck. He calmly planned how to transport her body from the coppice to the cemetery to dispose of it, and he wasn't in a rush to do it. Rocky did not know Lindsay, even though he lived just 3 minutes from Lindsay's residence. They had never met before or run into each other as far as anyone knew.
I'm just
The
saying,
attack
by the way,
was
this kid is 16 years old and he overpowered a woman in her prime. You know what I'm saying? I'm just putting that out there. Kid's 16 years old and he just fucking took out a chick that was in her prime.
Unprovoked, yet something had to have set him off to do the damage he had done to Lindsay's body. So, what would cause a young male to commit such a heinous crime? Was it curiosity in the most brutal way? Did something set him off? Did he just snap? Yet he had been described as unemotional by those who had contact with him in the outside world. Were they wrong? Did something deep inside him break loose and surface in the most horrific way? Rocky's parents escorted their son to the local police station. This was after seeing him on the CCTV footage that was shown on television. It had been used by the police, appealing to the public for any information they had on the missing woman, named Lindsay Burbeck. Rocky's parents were unsure as to how he was involved, but would be utterly shocked when they found out the reason. Shortly thereafter, Rocky was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Lindsay Burbeck. His parents were adamant that their son had not done anything wrong. Rocky was questioned over the course of days and would continually deny the responsibility of Lindsay's death. He eventually told police that a stranger had offered him a large amount of money to dispose of the body. He stuck to his story that he had not killed Lindsay. He had just moved her body.
For 6 months, I had a sergeant and 6 detectives scanning all the CCTV looking for this male. At the end of the investigation, I could confidently say there was no evidence whatsoever uncovered to show this male existed. And there was nobody else involved in Lindsay's murder.
Rocky said he had never met the man before that day, and the man had not been back in contact with him since then. Rocky said the man told him the money would be left for him in the coppice where the body had first been. But he did not find any money after he was finished with the job he was allegedly hired to do. Was he telling the truth or just spinning a tale?
So we were in court number 1 at Preston, and Rocky came in and he was sitting behind a glass screen. And his body language was, he'd slouch in his chair with his hands in his pockets. To me, it was just like he were going through a routine. He knew what was going to be the outcome. We hated being in the same room as him. The hatred we felt for him was unbelievable. To see him with that attitude made it worse.
Rocky stuck to his story of not guilty of murder when he first stood trial in January of 2020. But with the evidence they had, the investigation they had done, it would only take the jury 3 hours to come to a verdict: guilty of murder. But just as the trial was almost over, things came to a standstill. This happened when an investigation of some random cell phone footage popped up. It stood out because it was about a man that claimed that he himself had been involved in Lindsay Burbeck's murder. So Rocky's attorneys argued that the young man could not get a fair trial due to this new information, and that the footage needed to be investigated first by them before a verdict could be put into play. The first jury was released and the trial put on hold due to the new evidence. After a lengthy investigation, it was eventually determined by several investigators that the footage was false and the man had lied. The cell phone footage had nothing to do with the present Rocky Price case. A new jury was chosen, and the second trial proceeded. It went on for 8 days, with the jury making its decision on the verdict in just 4 hours this time. The outcome was guilty, just as it had been in the first trial. In my judgment, the defendant's mental disorder cannot in any way excuse or explain his actions. I have no doubt that he knew what he was doing when he killed Lindsay Burbeck, and that he knew that killing her was terribly wrong, according to Justice Amanda Yip, sentenced Rocky to life for murder in the Lindsay Burbeck case. He would have to serve a minimum of 16 years to life.
Because of his age, the minimum sentence was 12 years. But because it was premeditated, as in it followed the lady before Lindsay, and because of the length of time from when Lindsay went missing to being found, the class is aggravated. So because of his age, the premeditated and the aggravated, he got 16 years minimum to life. So the chances are he will never set foot out of jail for the rest of his life, which made me feel better.
After the initial 16 years, Rocky could be released if the parole board decides that he isn't a danger to the public any longer. If he is released, he will be on license or
I swear to God, if that kid gets released, he's gonna just attack
probation for the rest of his life. It is the equivalent of parole in the U.S. While some may not understand how license works in the UK, it has been said that it's worse than being in prison. Your life isn't yours anymore. You can live in the community instead of in a prison, but you'll never be truly free. Detective Inspector Tim McDermott of the Lancashire Police was in charge of the case. He said Miss Burbeck lost her life needlessly, adding, "We may never know why, because not only did Price deny killing her, he also claimed he moved the body for a man he didn't know. This was a lie which, thankfully, the jury saw straight through." Rocky's family were adamant that he did not do it, that he had been found guilty on circumstantial evidence, and just because he had autism did not mean he was a murderer. They insisted they had the wrong person. His mother's words echoed in the courtroom. "He's my son, and he's innocent."
Rocky's family haven't accepted that Rocky has killed him. They believe what he has said, and that somebody else did it.
Was he innocent, or was it just a heartbreaking plea from a mother begging for the life of her son?
What do you think, Chad? Did he do it?
As far as autism, what could have brought about such a change in Rocky? Teachers never had a problem with him, he never had outbursts, and they had never witnessed any aggression from him. Yet his own mother was concerned about how he would cope with the world as he grew up. Had there been a rage in him that would silently and quietly brew? One study found that 15 to 18% of adults who have autism and intellectual disabilities showed aggression. This is not to say that all individuals with autism are aggressive or that they would go to the levels Rocky has been found guilty.
One after another, bros. One after another.
The house fires, the wild accusations of stalking and murder plots. But the mother of four always bounced back, finding new cities, new husbands. It was only when husband number 5 died that the questions began. Had it really been bad luck plaguing Sarah all these years, or was there more to Sarah than anyone had imagined? Something truly terrifying. Join us in uncovering the depraved life of Sarah Jean Hartsfield. At the time of this story, Sarah Hartsfield is under indictment for murder. Previous cases have also been reopened for further investigation. Charges have yet to be placed. She is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Before we begin, we would like to send our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Joseph Hartsfield, David Bragg, and all those victimized by Sarah Hartsfield. Beach City, Texas is a community of about 3,000 residents on the outskirts of Houston. It is a small town surrounded by grasslands and lakes, a place where the residents enjoy wide sandy beaches and sweeping views across Trinity Bay. In early 2023, 2 of those residents were newlyweds Joseph and Sarah Jean Hartsfield, who met on a dating app earlier that year. At the time, 46-year-old Joseph had been working as a parole officer in Huntsville, Texas, but with his kids getting older, he was ready to find love again. And with Sarah Jean, Joseph felt like he had hit the jackpot. Charismatic and intelligent, 47-year-old Sarah was a 20-year veteran of the military who had risen to the rank of Sergeant First Class. She was a devoted mother of 4 grown children, and she made Joseph feel like the most important person in the world. As for Sarah, 4 failed marriages had left her questioning her judgment, but with Joseph, she felt she had finally found someone who treated her the way she deserved.
He's the guy you jump out of plane with. Like, he's that person. Like, whatever you're ready for, he's always ready. He always has your back, no matter what, right or wrong, he has your back.
The pair married only 3 months after meeting. Days after the wedding, they up and moved 2 hours from Joseph's family to a house in Beach City, a stone's throw away from Trinity Bay. It was a whirlwind start with a promising new life. But in those early days, Joseph didn't really know the real Sarah Jean Hartsfield. At midnight on January the 7th, 2023, the Chambers County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call from the home of Sarah and Joseph Hartsfield. It was Sarah who told the operator that she had just found her husband Joseph, a diabetic, unresponsive in his bed with dangerously low blood glucose levels. She had tried giving him jam and juice but could not rouse him. Paramedics transported Joseph to Houston Methodist Hospital, where doctors rushed to save his life. Over the next few hours, he would be pumped with intravenous glucose. Again and again, his blood glucose levels crashed. By now, Joseph had slipped into a coma. His distraught wife, Sarah, took to Facebook. She wrote that Joseph had fallen into a diabetic coma after not managing his insulin properly and was now suffering extensive brain damage. The following day, she posted again with a new diagnosis. Doctors had now confirmed that Joseph had suffered an ischemic stroke caused by a clogged artery. It was a result, she said, of years of eating too much junk food, and now everyone who loved him was going to pay the price. That price ultimately came on January 15th, when, after 8 days in the ICU, Sarah made the tough decision to take Joseph off of life support. She allowed his mother into the hospital to say goodbye to her son, but banned his siblings. They had been so ugly to her, and after all, Joseph was her husband.
So today we take the time to honor Joseph. In this moment, we admire Joseph and the family's selfless decision to save others through the gift of organ donation. In the depth of grief, hope has been born. Each person has a unique story to tell, one that will surely not be forgotten. May they enable.
About Sarah's behavior. A quick cremation followed, and an obituary online for Joseph was posted on February the 1st. It read that Joseph had died, quote, due to complications of an ischemic stroke, with his loving wife at his side. But while medics had been working hard to save Joseph's life, detectives from the Chambers County Sheriff's Office had been investigating the circumstances surrounding his sudden collapse. At 6:30 p.m. on the day Joseph was brought into the hospital, the sheriff's office had received a call by a nurse from the ICU who suspected one of her patients, Joseph Hartsfield, was suffering from an insulin overdose. His wife Sarah had been the only person with him at the time. She claimed to have slept through the repeated alerts from the glucose monitor they both wore, and after finding him unconscious had waited 1 hour before calling 911.
What?
Doctors also deduced that
wild.
Joseph's blood glucose levels had been dangerously low for around 6 hours before the paramedics were called. Suspecting foul play, detectives acquired a search warrant for Hartsfield's home. Next to Joseph's bed, they found 10 empty insulin pens. Various
Holy
items left
shit.
in the house contradicted Sarah's accounts of her movements that evening. Doctors now confirmed that Joseph had died from toxic levels of insulin, leading to his
10,
stroke.
bro.
With enough evidence to
That's
prosecute,
insane.
Sarah Hartsfield was arrested.
Tonight, his wife, 48-year-old Sarah Jean Hartsfield, is in the Chambers County Jail, accused of murdering him. An ambulance rushed her incoherent husband to this Baytown hospital on January 7th for a suspicious illness.
For as fast as they would think that he was getting better, he would immediately turn back right around and start crashing.
Chambers County Sheriff Brian Hawthorne says investigators dug in and performed search warrants. A grand jury returned an indictment Friday before deputies arrested her at their Beach City home. Investigators say she's lived in 39 different places throughout her adult life, and this was her 5th marriage.
When we started talking
Their
to
5th
other
marriage,
husbands,
bro. That's insane.
and then finding out some of them maybe aren't alive anymore,
5th marriage,
and other
That's
issues,
fucking wild.
everything just started pointing to foul play.
They interviewed at least 3 living exes.
Every relationship that appears that she's been in, everybody wants out of it because they fear for their life.
From the earliest days of the investigation, Chambers County District Attorney Cheryl Lake Henry had felt something was off about Sarah. She was right. As detectives investigated her past, they discovered one bizarre incident after the next. Mysterious deaths, allegations of arson, attempted murder, and assault. Was Sarah Hartsfield a serial wife or a serial killer? To answer that question, we need to go back to 1987, when a woman turned up at a Missouri CPS center with her 12-year-old daughter in tow, demanding they take her off her hands. That girl was Sarah Jean Smith. Sarah was put in the care of Barb and Steve Stewart, who lived in a small town 15 minutes from Sarah's own family. Child Protective Services warned Barb that Sarah had suffered significant abuse at the hands of her biological father. Sarah's mother had since divorced her father and remarried, but her new stepfather was fresh out of prison after serving a 12-year prison sentence for murder. Sarah would claim that he'd also abused her, but inconsistencies in her story led to the allegations being dismissed. Inconsistencies in Sarah's stories was something that she'd soon be known for, both among her friends and her foster parents. You just never knew with Sarah what was true and what wasn't, and there was something else that made Barb uneasy. While Sarah never raised her voice, her rage was unsettling. Once, when she was angry, she threatened to call and tell police that Barb's husband had been inappropriate with her. Barb and Steve persevered. Soon enough, Sarah had become a valued member of their family. But then came the first of what would turn into a long line of bizarre incidents. Several years after moving in with the Stewarts, Sarah's 10-year-old brother, who was still living with their mother in the next town, was found lying dead in the front yard. A nylon dog leash was around his neck. Police theorized that he had been playing with the leash on the front porch and he had fallen off, catching the leash on the railing of the stairs, and had strangled to death. A coroner's report estimated that he must have been hanging for 10 to 20 minutes before falling to the ground. His death was ruled an accident, but a police report described the incident as bizarre. Meanwhile, a caseworker noticed that Sarah's mother had showed virtually no emotion over the loss, and there were discrepancies in her story as well. Sarah picked herself up and carried on, and life with the Stewart family couldn't have been more idyllic. There were family vacations at a lake house and regular shopping trips. At school, Sarah's peers remember her as being popular with both the boys and the girls. She was wild when the boys lined up to date her. No one could recall anything about Sarah that might suggest what she would be later
Suck
capable
my nuts
of.
and call me Sally,
But then
bro.
came Titus Norenskild. Titus met Sarah in 1991 when he was a junior at the same high school. Titus had a reputation as a trusting, good-natured jock. The two began dating. At first, he found Sarah kind, funny, and caring. As the months rolled on, however, a different side of Sarah showed up. This Sarah was controlling, vengeful, someone who would lie and steal money from her friends, someone who, when things did not go her way, was frightening.
Your internet's having a
A
stroke,
pattern
eh?
developed where Sarah would dump Titus, date other people, and then sweet-talk him into taking her back. Against his better judgment, Titus married Sarah in September of 1993. A month after the wedding, they moved to Fort Hood, Texas, so Titus could join the Army. During his first training session, Sarah made the most of her freedom by having an affair. Numerous more affairs
girl.
followed. By early 1995, Titus was done. He filed for divorce. It should have marked the end of a bad chapter, but Sarah did not take the news as well as he'd hoped.
She just, was making it clear that I shouldn't leave her. She would leave me.
Bro, are you fucking
And
serious
then as
right
it got
now?
ugly, she told me that, not to be surprised if I don't make it through this. I was honestly surprised to get out of my marriage alive because I was in the Army. I had a $200,000 life insurance on myself at the time. So I was very concerned that I would end up dead so she could get the money.
By the time the divorce was finalized, Titus was telling friends that he
Bro, I
felt
ain't never
lucky
getting
to
health
escape
insurance.
with
If I
his
get married,
life,
that bitch ain't
only
getting no money.
he hadn't escaped. Not even close. When Titus began dating his future wife, Angela, strange things began happening. Angela's car was repeatedly vandalized. Her tires were slashed. Abuse scrawled across the windows. Soon, Sarah began openly harassing her.
So she would continuously show up into my life. You'd think she was gone. I have no children with her. There was no reason to be with her at all. And she would call our house and pester me, pester my wife. I was in the service, came back from Germany, got stationed at Fort Hood where she was also. And she showed up in my motor pool with stories of trying to give me stuff back that she kept, just to find out it was a scheme to try to get me to be with her. She threatened my family when I was in Oklahoma and my family was still in Fort Hood area, telling that she's going to be stopping by.
Titus and Angela went to the police, but Sarah convinced them that it was Angela who was the problem. It was part of this knack that she had, people said, for charming and manipulating people.
Sarah's a narcissist, and she's good at making herself look like whatever she wants or the other person wants to see.
The police sided with Sarah, and Angela and Titus were told that if they continued harassing her, they would be arrested. And Sarah still was not done with them. One night, while the couple were babysitting a friend's child, Angela smelled gasoline. Thinking it was coming from her car, she went outside. Someone had splashed gasoline over the whole front of the house. Down the street, they saw Sarah's car leaving. She had tried to burn the house down with them in it. Once again, they approached the police, but seeing her leaving the scene did not constitute attempted arson, so they did not pursue it. However, Titus did get a no-contact order.
So, for the military side, I outranked her, and I went through both of our commands, and I was able to get a no-contact order. It's a military form of a protective order. Meant that she could not contact myself or my family. Once she was out, that was null and void. She's very intelligent on how she does things, so trying to get a judge to give me a or a protective order would have been very difficult.
Even then, Sarah continued to pop up. Sometimes she would park her car outside of the house. Other times it was visits or phone calls. Meanwhile, her intent on getting revenge had not prevented her from finding a new target. This time, it was Titus's best friend, Michael Traxler. The same month her divorce to Titus was finalized, she married Michael and relocated to Houston, Texas. Like with Titus, the nice girl facade didn't last very long. 2 months after their wedding in January of 1996, police were called to the newlyweds' home. Sarah had attacked Traxler, leaving him with scratches and bruises. The case, however, was dismissed, but by the end of that year, Michael had filed for divorce. Luckily for him, Sarah was too distracted by a new endeavor to focus on revenge. She had joined the Army. Sarah's foster mother, Barb, was surprised. Sarah liked to be the one in control, but Sarah took to it like a duck to water. A decade later, she had worked her way up in the ranks from truck driver to intelligence analyst. And she wasn't just good at her job, she was brilliant. Her former supervisor, Army Captain Markovics, would describe her as whip-smart with a special ability for analyzing and compartmentalizing information. Soon, it was Sarah giving the orders, which is where things took a turn. Troops began complaining about her leadership style. She had zero tolerance for mistakes, showed no courtesy to anyone beneath her. People became so apprehensive around her that they made sure to never speak to her without someone else around. And she would never admit to a mistake on her part.
She never admitted any, wrongdoing. She's just not that kind of person. She's not going to.
Still, Sarah loved her job. It served a valuable purpose, access to an endless supply of men. Within a year of her divorce from her second husband, Traxler, Sarah met Army officer Christopher Donahue. She quickly fell pregnant and the two were married. The birth of their first daughter, Ashley, was followed by a boy, Ryan, and then 2 more girls. The family established themselves in the upscale neighborhood of Belton, Texas. With 4 children to care for, Sarah took a step back from her military duties. Then, in 2005, word reached Sarah that her biological father, the man who had abused her, was in poor health. Sarah volunteered to care for him in her home. Her family and friends were stunned, but Sarah explained that she was the best person for the job and collected him from his home in Missouri before setting him up in a spare bedroom. 3 days after he had arrived, Sarah gave him his daily medication. By that afternoon, he was dead. Doctors put his sudden death down to natural causes. After all, he was old, frail, and ill. Others found the episode somehow too convenient to be a coincidence. By 2007, Sarah had returned to active duty and had risen in the ranks to Sergeant First Class with a top-secret security clearance. To the people in her community, she was known as a super mom who juggled family life with a top military career. Her children were seen as immaculately dressed and well-behaved. Inside Sarah's house was a different story. Her daughter Ashley remembers her as a ticking time bomb. Her son Ryan remembers walking on eggshells, desperate to not make her mad. Even so, beatings were a regular occurrence, and they could go on for hours. Chris Donahue did his best to protect his kids, but no one could stand up to Sarah. Ryan remembers the first time he felt truly terrified of his mother. It was around the time when he was 10 years old. He was taking another beating when Sarah dropped the belt and began using her fist instead. Afterwards, he was so injured that he was out of school for a week. But it wasn't the beating that had scared him. It was how she had acted afterwards, sweet and caring, as though it had never happened. Sarah's eldest daughter, Ashley, threatened to call Child Protective Services. Sarah told her that if she did, she'd make sure that she had a good reason to, but other adults started noticing bruises. In one report made to Child Protective Services, Ashley was described as having a black eye, whip lacerations across her back, what appeared to be broken fingers as well, but when Ashley was questioned, she said the injuries were from an accident. The family mantra was, what happens in the house stays in the house. By now, Sarah felt immune to consequences, untouchable in the eyes of both the military and the community. Then came 2014. Sarah received a call from her eldest brother, Cody. Their grandmother, Merle, had passed away, leaving behind a house and 325 acres of prime farmland. The family drove to Missouri. Everything was friendly for the first day or so, until Sarah asked her brother about the will. Cody and his wife had been helping Merle tend the farm for years. Merle had left Cody everything and nothing to Sarah. A screaming match broke out. Later that day, a U-Haul came down the drive. Sarah spent the day loading Merle's possessions into the U-Haul. Cody let his sister do her thing, hoping it would satisfy her. He was wrong. At 2 a.m., Cody, his wife, and their 8-year-old young nephew were sleeping when Cody woke to the smell of smoke. A blaze was ripping through the drapes of the family room and across the wooden floors. Smoke was already black and billowing. He got his wife out of the house before briefly passing out, then managed to crawl out the door and to his brother's place for help, who rescued the nephew from the flames. The family were treated in hospital for smoke inhalation. The next day, Cody rang Sarah. He knew she had tried to kill them, and part of him wasn't even surprised. He just had 3 words to say to her.
Fuck you,
It
bitch.
didn't work. The fire department found the cause of the fire to be undetermined. A fire marshal felt differently. The fire had been lit in an area covered in poison ivy. When he questioned Sarah the following day, she had poison ivy on her face. But again, no charges were filed.
How?
The death
bro?
of
How
her
does this,
grandmother marked
How is there so much negligence in the police force? That's just crazy.
More than just another suspicious fire in Sarah's life. It was the start of yet another extramarital affair. At her grandmother's funeral, she had run into an old childhood friend named Brian Altus. Sarah told Brian that she and Chris Donahue were getting a divorce. Brian was quickly smitten with Sarah. He would later describe her as having something irresistible, a way of talking to you that made you feel like you mattered. And then the crazy came out. He said, if I didn't answer a text, she'd send an email or a Facebook message to me. If I didn't respond quick enough to one of her questions, she would go ballistic. Whenever she was mad, it was like World War III. Soon, Brian had tired of the relationship, but Sarah hadn't. Brian filed for a restraining order. She responded by telling him that she was pregnant. Brian didn't believe her, but agreed to meet at her house, where another argument broke out. Before Sarah left, she used his bathroom, where she spent so long that it made Brian uneasy. When she eventually left, he headed to a bar to celebrate. He had been there for 20 minutes when local police called to tell him that his house was on fire. By the time it was extinguished, his home had been gutted. An investigation ruled the cause of the fire to be faulty wiring. But Brian knew Sarah's skill set. He would later tell friends that he had dodged a bullet. But the next guy in Sarah's life wouldn't be so lucky. 43-year-old David Bragg was an Air Force veteran who ran into Sarah at Fort Hood, where he was doing some contract work. Bragg had a southern charm about him. Sarah launched her own charm offensive, and soon the pair had embarked on a secret affair. With Chris Donahue stationed in South Korea, Sarah moved Bragg into their spare room and told the children he was a friend. Bragg's mother would later say that he was head over heels in love and believed Sarah was the great love of his life. Meanwhile, the long-suffering Chris Donahue was finally done. He filed for divorce, and Sarah got engaged to David Bragg. Bragg had just accepted a new job in the small town of Garfield, Minnesota, where he found an old farmhouse that needed fixing up. He took on the task of repairing it and told Sarah to wait until it was ready. She ignored him. No sooner had he started the repairs when Sarah began turning up with truckloads of household items, and before he knew it, she had moved in along with her 3 youngest children. That is where the trouble began. Bragg's work on the house was irritating Sarah. He was moving too slow for her liking. He was making poor decisions. She criticized and berated him, regularly lost her temper, and for Bragg, alarm bells began ringing. This was the other side of Sarah, and it scared him. Bragg confessed to his brother that he wanted out. He told his parents he was deeply unhappy and began making plans to end the relationship in a way that would avoid too much upset. But he would never have the chance. On May the 9th, 2018, police were alerted to an incident at the old white farmhouse in Garfield. There, they found Sarah waiting for them, and David Bragg dead on the living room floor, a bullet in his heart. Sarah told police that Bragg had gone into a jealous rage over her ex-husband Chris and grabbed one of the 2 guns she had been carrying. As he fired, she had dived to the base of the stairs and fired back without aiming over the staircase railing. To her son, Ryan, it sounded farcical, like a bad action movie. He was the only one who doubted her story. Bragg's family knew he was an experienced military man with great marksmanship. The whole story sounded far-fetched. Bragg's brother felt it was planned.
Seeing and knowing my brother and knowing the situation around it and the conversations that he had, with my parents about leaving and getting out of the relationship, it just felt dirty. It felt wrong.
Before David Bragg died, Sarah had said to her daughter Ashley, "If anything happens and I have to defend myself, call this number and tell them to pick up the girls." When Ashley heard of the shooting, she was convinced her mom had planned to kill Bragg, believing that Chris Donahue would take her back if Bragg was no longer in the picture. An investigation found ballistic evidence that supported Sarah's claim of self-defense, and police didn't press charges. David Bragg's family were devastated. Sarah had her son Ryan clean up Bragg's blood and carried on with life as normal. Weeks later, she had moved another man in. Sarah told her foster mother Barb about the new man. At the same time, she broke the news of David Bragg's death. For Barb, this time the crazy had become too much. She ceased contact with Sarah. Sarah's new man was 59-year-old David George, a local farmer. George would later claim that he'd only met Sarah a few times before the shooting, when he would drop off propane at the house. But in a heavily redacted affidavit from the day of the shooting, one odd detail stood out. George's name lists among those at the scene or connected to the events at the time. And there was something else unusual. On January the 31st, 5 months before the death of David Bragg, George's longtime partner, Becky Kunz, age 62, had unexpectedly died. Her death was put down to heart valve problems, but an autopsy was never conducted. Within days, she had been cremated, and George had emptied his house of her possessions before any of her family had a chance to salvage any keepsakes. Becky's brother, Dana Kunz, said that he found George vague with the details of his sister's death. Everything felt rushed, he said. Her sisters were upset that her belongings had been cleared out, something they said didn't feel right. Then, on August the 31st of 2018, soon after the death of Bragg, the home George had shared with Becky mysteriously went up in flames. George told police that he and Sarah were in Texas at the time. 2018 had been a very busy year for Sarah. She had been closely connected to 2 deaths and another house fire, and she was already busy cooking up her next plan. In the summer of 2019, David George and Sarah were married. It was Sarah's 4th marriage. According to Ryan, David George was putty around Sarah. Even when she was wrong, he would agree with her, which was highly convenient for what Sarah had in mind. Soon after they were married, Sarah asked George to murder Chris Donahue's new wife, Heather. It was for the sake of her children, she said. Chris was fighting for custody of her girls. If his wife was dead, he would be too distracted to care. George would later say that he had no desire to kill anyone and believed that Sarah would tire of the idea. But the pressure from Sarah was relentless. Finally, at Sarah's insistence, he drove to Arizona with a pistol she had given him and had bought a black car specifically for the hit. He then turned up at the front door of the Donahue home under the guise of delivering flowers. Sarah had told him he couldn't come home until the job was done. This doorbell footage from the Donahue house shows George with a bouquet of roses. But instead of Chris's wife, it was Chris who answers the door. He asks if the flowers came with a card. George says he'll check, then walks to the car and drives away. George had botched the plan, and when he returned, he found himself banished from both the house and Sarah's life. The botched murder plot might have stayed secret forever had it not
What the fuck? That's crazy.
been for the fact that Sarah's daughters had overheard them talking and had told her father. Chris Donahue promptly contacted the FBI, who assigned a police officer to monitor the house. He also filed for full custody and a restraining order. He was granted both, but again, no charges were filed against Sarah. George told the police that the allegations were lies and fabrications and that Sarah did not present a danger. Sarah returned the favor by filing for divorce. The devoted George would later tell a journalist that he had been burned. He had loved Sarah and lied to protect her, only to be discarded. He then added that Sarah only had 2 loves in her life, herself and money. Predictably, Sarah was not single for long. Soon she had made the fateful connection with Joseph Hartsfield. Now 47, Sarah had retired from the military on 100% disability. She claimed she had physical injuries, post-traumatic stress, severe depression, and had 3 battles with cancer in different parts of her body. Having lost custody of her children, she was free to reap havoc anywhere she chose. In January of 2022, she sold the white farmhouse and moved to Huntsville, Texas, where Joseph was living and working. 3 months later, they were married and living in Beach City. Having taken him 2 hours away from his friends and family, Sarah now tried to prevent Joseph from having any contact with them at all. Sometimes she would block their numbers on his phone without his knowledge. His friends and family raised their concerns with Joseph, who had raised the issue with Sarah. Sarah retaliated by telling Joseph that his family had normalized emotionally abusive and controlling behaviors, and that they were trying to thwart his only chance at happiness. It was her temper that finally brought Joseph to his senses. It put him in fear for his life. He began going to work hours earlier than necessary just to escape her.
You know what's crazy? Champ? The gas station business? Motherfuckers will sit on the site for an extra 2 or 3 hours just because they don't want to go home to their wife. I literally sat in the truck with motherfuckers that would just sit there for 2 or 3 hours.
Mom, I'm done. I can't do
looking
it
at
anymore.
fucking YouTube
And if I
videos
stay,
or whatever
she's
on
gonna
the
drive
phone.
me crazy.
In December of 2022, Sarah's messages about Joseph suddenly turned venomous. She wrote to one friend that he had destroyed the house and would regularly leave food out and mess everywhere. To another friend, she wrote, "Joe has turned into a nightmare. I can't take the level of financial irresponsibility. He was just looking for a meal ticket and a way back to a lifestyle he could never attain on his own. I have to save myself and figure out how to recover. I have a plan. It's now a matter of implementing, executing, and finding a place to go." Like any normal person would, her friend assumed that she meant divorce. She told her daughter Ashley that Joe was an empty person. By Christmas, her hatred for him was all.
Yo, this daughter Ashley is gonna be like, fuck, you know what I mean? Like, that kid's been through so much shit, heard so much
she could
shit
talk
from her
about.
mom.
On the
He's gonna
29th
be
of
in the
December,
back like her mom.
2022, she posted on Facebook, "A man who has mommy issues tends to approach relationship issues like a boy. Arrested development will turn a marriage into a daycare. Pay attention." Meanwhile, Joseph was making secret plans to divorce Sarah, but he was nervous. He confided in several friends that he was worried Sarah might try to kill him. His mother was also scared of what Sarah might do and prayed every night that nothing would happen to him. On January 5th, 2023, Joseph returned to Huntsville and made arrangements to stay with a relative after he had sorted things out in Beach City. He'd opened a new bank account. Again, he told friends that he was worried Sarah might do something. On January 6th, Sarah posted, "The longer you entertain what's not you, the longer you postpone what is." By midnight the following day, Joseph was in a coma. A week later, he was dead. After his death, Sarah continued to post on Facebook. Her post ranged from reflections on her virtues as his wife to attacks on those who doubted her. Her last post was on February the 2nd. The next day, she was arrested for Joseph Hartsfield's murder. Unfortunately for Sarah, DA Leake had learned a lot about her and wanted her indicted before she had a chance to leave the county. She convened an emergency session of the county grand jury to have her indicted before the investigation into Joe's death had been completed, which was granted. Sarah was arrested and booked into the county jail on a $4.5 million bond, which was later dropped to $2 million. She pleaded not guilty.
Only on 2 tonight, for the first time, we are hearing from the woman accused of murder in Chambers County after her 5th husband died of a suspicious illness at a Baytown hospital in January. Sarah Hartsfield is behind bars on a $4.5 million bond.
Her first husband, Titus, was at home watching TV when Sarah's mugshot appeared in the evening news. He wasn't surprised at all.
Not overall, no. It's in her nature. She's killed before. When I lived with her, I feared for my life. So, no, I was just upset to hear another man had died.
Her former boss says it was more of a shock that she got caught.
It was a little bit of a surprise. A second, it was like, oh my gosh, she finally got busted. The surprise was that she got caught.
On April the 27th, 2023, a grand jury convened after new documents emerged. This time, her daughter Ashley testified for the prosecution. Sarah
Good,
also
yo, that kid's
testified,
good,
calling
good.
diabetes an individual responsibility. Since her arrest, the death of David Bragg has been reopened for investigation in Douglas County, as well as the death of Becky Coons, David George's wife, quote, in light of new information.
Today, the family of David Bragg, the former fiance of Sarah Hartsfield, tell us they're glad that this case is being reopened and revisited because they've had a lot of questions and concerns since this happened nearly 5 years ago. Today, the attorney in Douglas County, Minnesota, tells ABC 13 nearly 5 years since his death, they got new information and felt they needed to reopen this case. David Bragg's family says they were never able to fully move forward following his 2018 death at the hands of his fiancée, Sarah Hartsfield, whose last name was Donahue at the time. A determination letter written by Douglas County, Minnesota attorney Chad Larson 4 years ago states Sarah shot and killed Bragg after an argument became physical. An investigation determined she acted in self-defense. But now, the same attorney tells ABC 13 the sheriff's office there received new information last night, causing them to reopen the case.
As for Sarah, she is as bitter and vengeful as ever. In a statement sent to KPRC Channel 2, she wrote of Joseph's family. They were repeatedly divisive, intrusive, and didn't want to be a part of our life. They wanted to drag Joe back to a life he voluntarily left. While their pain is relevant, I lost my husband that I loved dearly. They ensured I suffered alone every step of the way, no matter how many olive branches were extended to them. Joe would be absolutely horrified at the hate campaign they enlisted against his wife. So, after so many husbands, lovers, friends, and children, who does Sarah have left? Only people who have been waiting for retribution for years. Sarah's son, Ryan Donahue, says he always believed the bad stuff would catch up with his mother. It's unreal seeing my mom in that jumpsuit now, he says. I've waited for it my whole life. As for whether there might be other victims, Sarah's son Ryan says, absolutely. There are some I have in mind that I'm kind of waiting to come to light. Sarah's response to Ryan, only that she's disappointed that they weren't supporting her after all she did for them.
Yeah, I kicked your fucking ass.
If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Less than half the folks who watch our videos are subscribed.
I beat the fucking snot out of you. You should be grateful, kid.
Year-old retired U.S. Marine Ewan DeWitt. Minutes later, a frantic call made to the Milford Police Department by a 17-year-old reported that his mother was being assaulted by a man in their home, the same man spotted on camera. What was the connection between Ewan and this woman that led to this shocking incident? What could drive a former Marine to such violence? Join us as we uncover the disturbing story of Julie Minogue. Before we begin, we would like to send our deepest condolences to the loved ones of Julie Minogue, who fell victim to the abominable acts described in this case.
Bro, the editing on this guy's channel is fire. His videos are just really short.
Julie Minogue was born on July the 19th, 1982.
To be like an hour long each, you know?
In Goshen, New York, the daughter of Gerald Minogue and Sandra Barash Doper. She had two siblings, Allison Barati Corcoran and Peter Gerald Minogue, with Julie being the youngest. She graduated from the Monroe Woodbury High School and then attended Orange County Community College. With her professional life ahead of her, she moved to Milford, Connecticut, and began working as a medical assistant with the Coastal Obstetrics and Gynecology. In Julie's personal life, she was a good, caring mother to three boys, Nicholas, Sean, and Luke. For most of the boys' lives, she had been a single parent. Nicholas was the oldest at 21 and was serving in the U.S. Coast Guard. Sean, at 17, was still in high school, and the baby boy was Luke at the age of 3. Nicholas and Sean were Julie's children from a previous relationship. Luke came along after Julie had a relationship with a man named Ewan A. Dewitt of Roxbury, Connecticut, whom she'd met in 2017. A relationship that was doomed from the beginning. On November 9, 2019, DeWitt was arrested for assaulting Julie by throwing a playpen at her head while she was holding their infant son. The charges were second-degree assault and risk of injury to an infant. Both were felonies. The 6-week-old was not harmed, but Julie sustained a concussion and required staples for the gash the playpen left on her head. DeWitt was also charged with misdemeanor third-degree criminal mischief and disorderly conduct. He destroyed Julie's phone so she couldn't call 911, and she had to flee to a neighbor's residence to make the call. DeWitt was accused of being drunk when the disturbance occurred. In the months that followed, he would go through alcohol treatment and a treatment program for veterans who had used violence in relationships. A protective order was also issued to DeWitt, who pleaded not guilty and was released on a $20,000 bond. Julie left DeWitt in 2021 and moved herself and the children into a condominium in Milford, Connecticut. She also filed for child support in August of 2021, and in October 2021, DeWitt was ordered to pay. Then, in December of that same year, DeWitt took Julie to court over visitation. Julie's attorney filed an objection because of the pending assault case, and there had been a new arrest in North Carolina for DeWitt. This was for allegedly assaulting a female along with emergency personnel. DeWitt had also been allegedly harassing staff at his son's.
Bro, you gotta be like some kind of piece of shit to honestly like hurt a woman. Like
daycare.
Unless they're trying to kill
Records
you, bro.
show that an agreement was reached on supervised visitation for DeWitt. He
Damn,
would
I'm
have
fucking
visitation
kill that bitch, you know
every
what I'm
other
saying?
Saturday for 2 hours only, and this would be in a public place at Eisenhower Park. Sadly,
Just for
in
no
many
reason, though?
family cases,
That's
a parent
wild.
is pressured
Doesn't
to give
compute.
access to the abuser that they're afraid of,
Does
so
not
Julie
compute.
could not escape the order. I don't feel I should be subjected to this abuse any longer, Julie wrote in a November 17th affidavit, the Connecticut Post reported. I'm scared for the safety of my children and myself. Ewan has gotten himself into a lot of trouble with drugs and alcohol, and I'm scared he's going to kill me. On November the 14th of 2022, Julie told the Milford police that her ex-boyfriend, Ewan DeWitt, had violated a protective order. He had sent her over 220 harassing texts. On November the 17th, 2022, a judge granted a temporary civil restraining order against DeWitt. Then, on November the 21st of that year, the police submitted an arrest warrant application. Officer Scott Nablin of the Milford Police Department handled the paperwork for the warrant. It would go to the state attorney for the violation of the protective order. The application was denied and sent back with a request for more information, thus causing a delay in the warrant being served. Instead of more information being collected, the warrant application was not resubmitted, and it was never signed. On December 1st of 2022, on a separate issue, a judge granted an extension to the restraining order from November the 14th. Then, on December 6th, 2022, at around 9 p.m., a call came in to 911 requesting immediate help at 76 Salem Walk in Milford, Connecticut. The caller was 17-year-old Sean Minogue. He had awakened to screams coming from downstairs. Sean told 911 that DeWitt, her mother's ex-boyfriend, was holding an axe and his mother was on the floor in the kitchen, covered in blood. A ring camera provided by a neighbor shows a man walking with an axe in his hand, matching the description of DeWitt.
Ben and Jen, the victim, 40-year-old Julie Minogue, lived in
here.
those condos behind me. Police say the suspect, 42-year-old Ewan DeWitt, was somehow able to get inside her home with an
I'll open the
axe,
door for you,
allegedly
but
killing her
if
while
I
both
open
her
it, you're staying
children
out.
were inside the home.
That's the thing.
Sean had told 911 that he had run back upstairs, locked the door, and called for help. He then jumped out of his bedroom window to meet with the police when they arrived. When police officers entered the home, they found a large axe on top of the stove with evidence on the blade and Julie's body on the floor in a large pool of blood. She was suffering from fatal injuries, was not moving, and appeared to not be breathing. It would later be determined by the medical examiner that the cause of death was from hacking wounds and blunt impacts to the head, torso, and extremities. Authorities would rule it as a homicide. Julie's 3-year-old son was on the couch, in shock and not moving. Both sons had been witnesses to the brutal attack on their mother. Julie Minogue was just 40 years old at the time of her death. Ewan DeWitt was nowhere to be found. DeWitt fled the scene, so officers began canvassing the neighborhood and surrounding areas. Soon after, the mother of DeWitt called 911 to report that her son had called her and had admitted that he had just killed his girlfriend. Mrs. DeWitt said her son wanted to kill himself. She gave the officers his cell phone number, which they proceeded to call in an attempt to make contact with him, but he refused to talk and just hung up. It was unclear how the officers received the following information, but they headed towards a place called Dive Bar on Ocean Avenue in West Haven, where DeWitt had been spotted. The bar was less than a mile from Julie's home. Police were flagged down by 2 individuals who recognized DeWitt wandering around in the parking lot of the dive bar. He was last seen entering a food truck parked at a bakery on Ocean Avenue. Officers entered the truck, found DeWitt, and took him into custody.
I thought they were gonna find him.
The owner of the property was shocked that DeWitt was found inside her food truck, but she was glad that he had been caught and arrested.
Had you not tell me, I would not know, unless now I'm going to go on my cameras and see it for myself.
Louise was dumbfounded to learn last night police found accused killer Ewan DeWitt hiding in the food truck outside her bakery and restaurant.
And I mean, I don't even know what to say, but to even think that the gentleman was in the trailer, I mean, I don't know. It's very sad, very sad. Very sad that something like that has happened. I didn't even know there was a murder yesterday, and that's a tragedy. Just happy that they caught him, and I feel very bad for the family.
Ewan DeWitt, age 42, was charged with murder, violation of a protective order, violation of a restraining order, risk of injury to a child, and reckless endangerment. Here was DeWitt, charged with the murder of the mother of his 3-year-old son, the same man who had previously been arrested for assaulting her, the same man recently harassing Julie, and she in turn begging for help from officials. All of this just weeks prior to her murder.
Bro.
The attorneys on both sides cited
such like a repeating fucking pattern. You know what I mean? I've come to notice it's such a repeating pattern in like the police force and shit. They just never take anybody's fucking concern seriously until they're dead. Like most of the time. It's crazy.
Mental health concerns with DeWitt. His history showed that he had served in the Marine Corps from 2009 until 2013. He was a veteran, and there had been some mental health issues, possibly caused by his time in the military. During his arraignment, DeWitt gave a full admission to officers of what had occurred. At the request of DeWitt's attorney, he was placed on suicide watch while being held on a $5 million bond. Keeping the innocent safe is difficult because many offenders disregard the protective orders. No imaginary line will keep them from what they are after, regardless of the consequences to themselves. Things had gone terribly wrong. Officer Scott Nablin with the Milford Police Department submitted the initial warrant application on DeWitt to the Asonia Milford State's Attorney's Office. It was reviewed by a prosecutor and returned that day with a request for more information. The warrant itself was not resubmitted until December 13th, just a week after Minogue's murder. There was an investigation into the reason why this was not done as soon as possible. It is common for prosecutors to send back applications for more information. They just want a strong case, not just a probable cause. Thus, the warrant application went back to Officer Nablin to gather more information, but it was not followed through upon. The ball was dropped. The officer was put on leave while an internal investigation was done. This tragedy, this domestic violence case, questions the safeguards needed in the process of obtaining a warrant because it is often considered imminent danger. Thus, it may need to be handled quickly. After Julie's death, a different officer refiled the warrant for the arrest of DeWitt, of which he would be served additional charges for the violations in jail.
A man accused of killing his ex-girlfriend with an axe is now facing more charges involving the victim. Today, Ewan DeWitt was served with a new arrest warrant for harassment and a violation of a protective order. It stems from a complaint that Julie Minogue made to Milford police before her murder, when DeWitt allegedly sent her 220 text messages. According to the warrant, which News 12 obtained, some of the text messages from Ewan DeWitt to the victim were derogatory in nature. It says some of the text messages from the victim to Ewan DeWitt indicated that the victim did not want Ewan DeWitt to text message her and to leave her alone forever. Police initially submitted an arrest warrant for DeWitt to the court last month, but it was returned to police with a request for more information. For unknown reasons, it was not resubmitted before Minogue's murder, December 6th. And this morning, DeWitt made his first in-person court appearance in the murder case. He kept his head down as he stood next to his public defender. He'll be back in court on all the charges February 3rd. A vigil in Minogue's memory on Sunday drew hundreds of people, including the lieutenant governor.
Clearly, we need to do more, and we need to get the community involved in trying to identify situations that are dangerous so that we can keep people safe.
According to the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Minogue's death is the 11th from intimate partner violence in the state this year. Last year, there were 16.
Officer Scott Nablin of the Milford PD was placed on leave for 9 months during the internal investigation, but he eventually resigned in July of 2023 following that investigation. This would be done from the connection with his inaction on the warrant application and the subsequent death of Julie Minogue in December of 2022. Julie had gone to the police with her newest concern and had made that complaint to Officer Nablin. She told the officer that DeWitt had broken the protective order against him. She had pleaded for help, and she put her trust into the legal system's hands. 2 weeks later, Julie was murdered. Gerald Minogue says his daughter Julie did everything right in alerting the authorities and filing the proper paperwork in order to try and protect herself and her children from a dangerous situation. When I got there, they told me she was dead. Then I heard the brutal details of it, Gerald said. I can't even fathom another human being doing that to another. I mean, that's barbaric. According to the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Connecticut sees 14 intimate partner murders every year, but the lethality of the murders and how they are carried out have become even more extreme. Michael Rosnick, the attorney representing the Minogue family, filed a letter of intent that named the city of Milford, the police department, and Officer Nablin concerning impending litigation. The letter stated that Julie's death was preventable and the family would be seeking multiple damages. Mr. DeWitt had a long history of violent behavior against Miss Minogue and others, Resnick wrote, contending this was known or should have been known by the proposed defendants. Rosnick contends that the proposed defendants failed to take threats against Minogue's life seriously and act to protect her in a timely and appropriate fashion.
So this is just horrific, and I usually try to understand sort of both sides of the coin in these issues, but I'm really having a hard time here. He also had assault charges that were pending from 2019 from two separate incidences. The first was assaulting a female paramedic, and then the second was
went back and watched me shoot watched this play yesterday, bro, and honestly, I was shooting so straight.
And that's what's surprising to me is I'm surprised that in 4 years, even with COVID, those charges were still pending. I think with the
Until it mattered
totality
most.
of the circumstances, the assault charges, the copious amounts of phone calls, the clear amount of stalking that he was engaging in, an arrest warrant should have been issued for him. And I do feel that the judge was in the wrong here, actually not issuing one, and her death could have been prevented because of that.
Meanwhile, DeWitt has changed his plea to not guilty on all charges.
How the fuck can you be not guilty when they literally have this cocksucker walking in there, and then the police show up, and he's literally standing over the chick with the axe? Like, what the fuck?
Hundreds gathered at a vigil honoring Julie Minogue, who was killed just 5 days earlier in her home. Those who knew her described her as someone who lit up a room whenever she was in the presence of others. But when she was at her brightest, she was talking about her great love, her children.
Girlfriend.
She was a happy, positive force in their lives, and she was an amazing, protective, and loving mother. Julie also cared deeply for her friends, her co-workers, and her patients. She was just that type of person, and she wanted them to know that they were important and loved. The closest people to Julie knew about her ongoing domestic problems, and they had worried about her, but they had been shocked by the end result of this constant problem. They were angry at the senseless death of this woman, but they came together during the vigil to grieve and to support the family and hopefully to heal. Julie's sister had even set up a GoFundMe account for the 3 boys that raised over $100,000 that Sunday afternoon at the vigil. People were raw from the feelings they had after Julie's death, and they needed to turn those feelings into something positive, and they did so by turning it into a positive fight against domestic violence. That violence is not going away on its own. It affects millions of people worldwide. There needs to be an increased awareness, knowledge, and education, along with help for the victims. Over 10 million people are affected by domestic violence each year in the U.S. An average of 24 people per minute are victims of sexual assault, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, totaling over 12 million men and women annually. Nearly 3 in 10 women, 29%, and 1 in 10 men, 10%, have experienced sexual violence, physical violence, and/or
How much you want to bet that the men's number is also higher? It's just that no one will talk about it, or no one believes them.
Or stalking by a partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men aged 18 and older have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner. Julie's family has filed a lawsuit against Milford and its police department for mishandling her numerous requests for help during her time with Ewan DeWitt. Damages sought would include any medical expenses, pain and suffering, and loss of affection. Because of their failure to take the appropriate action that was needed to prevent Julie's death, Ewan DeWitt had previous charges from North Carolina in an assault on a female and the assault of Julie, yet both were still pending. If he had been served and placed behind bars, Julie might be alive today.
I got hit again.
For a kid, my daughter, I should say.
Suck my fucking nuts and call me Sally,
a monster,
bro.
as I'll call him.
DeWitt also never obeyed any of the paperwork that was filed against him regarding the protective order or the domestic violence order.
Tragedy, should ever come close to what we've encountered with my daughter.
Julie's death was preventable, and there was too much history with DeWitt for them not to see that. It's imperative for the legal system to perform their duties. The system had failed Julie Minogue miserably. Julie did what she did to keep herself and her children safe, yet she was murdered in her own home by her ex-boyfriend and the father of her youngest child. So did the system fail her? The system, of course, isn't perfect, but the laws and legal systems that are in place do need some tweaking. Abusers will do anything to get around the laws just to get to their victim. They will take the victim to court to gain visitation or custody of the child or children, which means they only use the child to gain access to their victim.
With a legislative session on the horizon, the General Assembly's Judiciary Committee plans to tackle this and other issues, including the possible expansion of the state's GPS monitoring program for domestic violence offenders, but also the hot-button issue of bail reform.
Bail bondsmen will compete with each other with the...
Yeah, that shit's boring as fuck. That case was ass. Pretty crazy though, the motherfucker killer with an axe. Phil McCock. This kid's name in my game is Phil McCock. Phil McCock. That is funny as fuck. Phil McCock. Bro, this video is 5 hours fucking long. Of 2023. Let's do it.
Police, fire, medical.
I need emergency, please.
What?
Ambulance. Someone is hurt. Lacerate cuts.
Okay, who's cut?
Who is this? It's a teenager.
Okay, male or female?
It's a girl or a boy. I think it's a girl. They have a major cut to their neck.
Do you know what happened?
I don't know. My husband heard someone screaming and then we came outside.
Ma'am, do you know if this person was assaulted?
I don't know.
Well, obviously they were assaulted,
They
you
have a
fucking
major
idiot.
wound to their neck and they're struggling to breathe.
Like, what do you mean, bro?
I don't
Were
think
they
they're even
assaulted?
responsive
Are
at
you
this point.
fucking dumb? They're
she
fucking laying
breathing?
there almost dead.
I don't see any breath. Yes.
Oh.
Breathing.
Okay. She is breathing, you think?
Yes, but struggling.
Ma'am, is the blood spurting or pouring out?
No, it's all over the ground.
Okay, but is it spurting out or pouring out of the person?
It may have already. I don't think this person has any more blood. It looks like a knife wound.
Okay.
I don't think they're breathing anymore. I don't see them breathing. I don't think they're with us.
In a jealous rage, a killer stabbed his victim multiple times and attempted to sever her head before fleeing into the woods as someone stepped out of their home hearing the commotion. The killer left his victim to bleed to death. Why did he do it? And why were the warning signs ignored after his first victim?
What?
Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the loved ones of Kay Baker, who fell victim to the abominable acts described in this case. Meet Kay Elizabeth Baker, a 43-year-old woman living in Lithia County, Florida, with her two sons. Kay was a third-grade math and science teacher at Cypress Creek Elementary School in Ruskin, beloved by her students and peers. It was on a quiet, warm spring night on May 28, 2022. Jonathan Figgins, who lives next door to Kay, was sleeping peacefully on his couch, his wife and children sound asleep upstairs. It was right after midnight when Mr. Figgins heard unsettling sounds that roused him from his sleep. The best he could describe what he heard was the sound of someone falling on the floor and then a female gasping for breath. Mr. Figgins first thought one of his daughters had fallen out of bed and hit the floor, but when he went upstairs to check, everyone was sound asleep in their beds. Upon investigating outside, Mr. Figgins spotted what he believed to be a teenage girl laying face down on the ground near his front yard. This woman later was identified as Kay Baker. Kay was lying in a pool of blood that appeared to be coming from around her neck. While checking the status of the injured woman, Mr. Figgins heard a sound from behind. He turned to hear a rustling sound that appeared to be coming from the wooded area behind his home, but he saw nothing. Mr. Figgins told his wife Ruth to call 911. By the time fire rescue and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office deputies arrived, Kay was gone. The medical examiner who inspected Kay's body at the crime scene discovered that she had multiple stab wounds to her shoulders and neck. Kay's neck laceration was so extreme, detectives concluded that the attacker had intended to sever her head from her body. Deputies searched the perimeter of Kay's home. In the driveway, detectives found a gray Ford Focus. After running the tags, they found out that it belonged to a Matthew Terry. One window was open and the screen was knocked out. The room belonged to one of Kay's boys, neither of which were home that night. This window was facing the Figgins home. From the window, turning right led to the front yard area, the area where Kay had been found. Left led into the backyard, where drops of blood were discovered. Detectives were able to quickly obtain a search warrant to enter Kay's home. Inside the house, it was noticed that in the kitchen a single knife was missing from a butcher block knife set, and a cell phone had been left nearby. The knife missing from the set was a specialized paring knife called a bird's beak knife, given that name because of its 3-inch curved blade, which resembled a parrot's beak. The knife was never located. The bathroom door frame had major damage, showing that someone had violently forced the door open at some point. The main bedroom showed recent signs of forced entry as well, and another cell phone was found on the nightstand. Deputies found the door to the child's room with the open window was locked, so they had to force the door open. They found no one inside the house. To follow the blood trail, deputies brought in a bloodhound. The scent led the dog into a thick wooded area behind the subdivision. After trailing the scent for a while, the bloodhound led the deputy to an area of woods off of Lithia Pinecrest Road. There, they found a patch of grass covered in blood. Knowing there was a good chance that the perpetrator was nearby, deputies decided to bring out a different canine unit, a Belgian Malinois, one trained to attack and apprehend criminals. Deputies led the dog towards the blood found by the bloodhound and shouted out warnings that they had a dog that will bite if whoever is out there doesn't come out. After a moment, the dog begins barking and attempts to charge forward. They soon found Matthew hiding in the tall grass and bushes. He was wearing only a t-shirt and his underwear. His clothes were soaked in blood. Matthew had injuries on his neck and was having difficulty walking. After apprehending Matthew, police ended their chase and Matthew was arrested on first-degree murder charges. May 27th marked the last day of the school season. To celebrate, Kay went to the Landing Bar and Grill that night with her boyfriend, 47-year-old Matthew Terry. At some point, Kay and Matthew got up to use the restrooms. Kay came out first and happened to run into a friend of hers, Kelly Andrews. Excited to bump into each other, Kay starts doing a little happy dance. As Kay is doing her little happy dance, a man, unknown to either Kay or Kelly, walked by and playfully mimicked Kay's happy dance as he passes by. This lasts for maybe 4 seconds. This interaction between Kay and the stranger occurred right as Matthew was walking out of the restroom. Matthew immediately jumped to the conclusion that Kay had danced with another man and became furious. At the bar, Matthew starts an argument with Kay, angrily accusing her of dancing with another man. This accusation is heard by both Kelly and a nearby bar patron. Matthew and Kay left the bar and headed home around 11:30 p.m. It was about a 90-minute drive back to their home, and Matthew continued to argue with Kay about dancing with another man. Kay decided to call Kelly and have her tell Matthew that she wasn't dancing with a passing stranger. Kelly overheard Kay tell Matthew to stop being stupid. After the phone call, Kelly received a text message from Kay at 11:56 p.m. that read, "LOL, sorry for that, so dumb, all good now." About 30 minutes later, Mr. Figgins found Kay bleeding to death in his yard. Investigators at the crime scene believed Matthew had attempted to murder Kay while he was in a drunken rage. They believe he stabbed her multiple times and attempted to remove her head before she found a way to escape through a window and made her way into her neighbor's yard. Kay was not Matthew's first victim. He had a criminal history of violence towards women, which Kay was well aware of. 5 years before Matthew murdered Kay in a jealous rage, he was in a relationship with a woman named Michelle Rogers. Matthew and Michelle had met over a dating app in 2015. They both lived in Michigan at the time. Michelle lived there with her 5-year-old son. Matthew had spent a few years in the Marines. Around the time he met Michelle, he was working as a wrestling coach. After dating casually for a few months, Michelle decided that she wanted to end the relationship. That is, until she found out that she was pregnant. For the baby, Michelle thought it best to make her relationship with Matthew work. Soon, they moved in together. But all too soon, it became apparent that Matthew was abusive and violent, and these behaviors worsened when he drank. Once, he threw a cast-iron pan at Michelle while she was holding their infant son.
I mean, I've fucking thrown a cast iron fucking frying pan at my sister before, but she wasn't holding a baby. I've also beat my sister up with a sock full of pennies before.
Another time, Matthew picked up her cat and threw it against the wall. On nights when he was both angry and drunk, Matthew would show up at Michelle's apartment and bang on her door saying that he knew she was sleeping with another man and would demand to be let in. During that time, Matthew worked for a local internet provider. One day, he told one of his co-workers he wanted to stab the out of Michelle. The co-worker took Matthew's statement as a way of venting and thought nothing more of it. But a few months later, on March 17, 2017, it was brought to light just how serious Matthew was. Matthew and Michelle had gone out bar hopping with a few of their friends that day. Around 6 p.m., Michelle was ready to go home. She went looking for Matthew, who happened to be at a bar adjacent to the one that she was in. Michelle found him so drunk he was slurring his words and stumbling. Michelle was so upset by how drunk Matthew had allowed himself to get that she went home and left him at the bar. Around 8 p.m., Matthew comes knocking at the back door.
He knocked at that door and I proceeded to let him in. At that time, he was very clearly drunk. He couldn't walk straight. He seemed just very
belligerent.
It's hard to describe, but just you could kind of sense his energy as being very frustrated or angry or upset.
Belligerent?
Just in general, just a general sense.
So
belligerent?
You got a vibe off of him that he seemed angry?
Correct.
Did you do anything in that moment?
I did not. I went and I sat back down on the couch where I was when he showed up.
And what does he do?
So he went into the kitchen, and I believe he was making a sandwich. He was making some kind of food at the counter, and the kitchen and the living room area is pretty open. So as I was sitting on the couch, I could see him. So I remember sitting on the couch watching TV, and then the next thing I remember is standing behind the couch, and I'm looking at him in the kitchen, and I remember him coming around the counter and coming at me.
And before we get to the part where he comes at you, do you remember if you guys are having any sort of argument, if anything's being said, either he's saying something, you're saying something, whatever the case may be?
I don't recall any of that, no.
So you remember now all of a sudden there's a moment he's coming at you, and I want you to describe that as best as you can. Do you mean he's just leisurely walking in your direction?
No, he was coming at me very quickly and aggressively to the point where I kind of backed off and braced myself, and I actually verbally said, what are you doing? Oh my God, what are you doing?
And when you said the words to him, what are you doing? What, if anything, did he do?
He proceeded to knock me into the front door that was behind me. And at that point, then we both fell to the floor. So then we're on the floor, and he's just trying to keep me on the floor, and he keeps punching me wherever he can find access to punch me. So whether it be the face, the chest, the back, wherever. And he was a wrestler, and the best way I can describe what he was doing is trying to keep me in wrestling moves and keep me on the floor so that I couldn't escape.
When you say he's a wrestler, you mean like in the WWE, or you mean like a high school coach?
A high school coach, or a coach. Maybe it wasn't high school, but he was a wrestling coach. and I can't remember if he wrestled himself, but as the struggle continues and I'm trying to break free, there was
well,
a
if he
point,
was a wrestling coach, one could
when I
only
yelled
assume
at
he
him, I
was
said, I
definitely
love you, why are
wrestling
you doing
himself.
this? And he said,
What the fuck?
no you don't, fuck you, I'm gonna kill you. He just continues to, for lack of a better phrase, beat the shit out of me. And I keep trying to escape. There is a point where I'm able to stand up.
For lack of, that's pretty powerful in front of a jury, eh? For lack of a better phrase, beat the shit out of me.
Continues to punch me in the face.
That's got to be pretty powerful
at
in
one
front
point,
of a
he
jury.
gets me
No joke.
onto the floor, and
For lack of better term, beat the shit.
no,
out of me.
it moved through the living room, and then where I landed on the floor was, I landed face first, with my upper body like on the kitchen tile, and then my lower half was on the carpet of the living room. And at that point, there was blood everywhere.
Where is the blood coming from?
My
believe
face,
my nose at that
motherfucker.
time. He had broken my nose. But I remember trying to push myself up, and he was on me. And every time I tried to push myself up, I couldn't grip on the floor because there was so much blood. And he would purposely put his weight on me and push me back down, so I was unable to get up.
I don't know why. Okay, that's terrible, but that was kind of fun. That's kind of funny. He just sits back down on top of her. Like, what the fuck? There's so many things that guy could have been doing. He just sits back down on top of her. Like, what the fuck?
Comes next?
That's how you know he was just drunk as fuck.
So I remember laying there, and I was laying on my left side, and
you can tell by his demeanor, this is exactly what
happened. I
happened.
remember seeing the trash can there. There was a black trash can. And at this point, he was taking both of his hands, and he was taking my head, and he was slamming it into the floor. And
ooh, Jesus fucking Christ!
So every time he would do that, my vision would go black, and I thought he was going to knock me out, or I would be unconscious or something at some point. I was thinking, like, holy shit, that, is this really happening? And I was really disoriented and dizzy, and I was hearing all the shuffling in the kitchen, and then the next thing you know, Mr. Terry comes around behind me and stabs me in the neck.
When you say he stabs you in the neck, do you know what he stabs you with in the neck?
I didn't see it, but it was a knife. So at that point, again, it was just kind of the thought, like,
she survived.
holy shit, he just stabbed me with a knife. Like, I need to get the hell out of this house, or I'm gonna die in here. And so I remember standing up, and as I stood up, he continued to, try and stop me and try and punch me. I was able to get loose for enough time to be able to turn around, and directly behind me there was the garage door. So I was able to get the garage door open and run to the garage. So I pushed the opener with my left hand as I was running out, to try and get the garage door to open so I could escape that way.
And did the garage door start to open?
It did.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
It was very slow, so I couldn't quite get under it right away before he was able to get to me again.
All right, so now you're waiting for the garage door open enough, and he attacks you again?
Yes.
Describe how he's attacking you again.
He was just trying to stop me from leaving, and we both fell to the ground at that point, and somehow had rolled out of the garage that was open, down the driveway.
So now you've spilled out onto the driveway, like out in public.
Correct.
And what's happening there?
So we were rolling down the driveway a bit, and I ended up in a position where I was under him, and he was on top of me. He had used both of his hands to take my head and slam it into the cement multiple times.
Ooh.
Sorry. So he had the knife, and he had stabbed me 3 times in the right shoulder.
All right, so he's still armed with this knife, even though you fled out of the home and he's chased you.
Yes, and this entire time I'm screaming for someone to come help me.
At any point, do you realize that some sort of neighbor or person nearby has responded to your calls for help?
Yeah, as I was screaming, I could very faintly hear voices across the street saying, get off of her, and just hear them talking. A lot of it I couldn't make out what they said.
All right, and so we're at a point where Mr.
Yeah, they're all talking. They're just about to watch this chick get murdered. Like, get off her.
He's still armed with a knife. Tell me what else he's doing and what you're doing in response.
Fuck people, man.
So again, I'm screaming this entire time that he's going to kill me and somebody please help me. But he had stabbed me those 3 times in the shoulder, and he went to bring the knife down again, and I had reached up and I grabbed with my right hand the blade onto the in midair, and don't ask me how I did it. I just grabbed, and I took
that's
the
gotta
knife
hurt.
and I pulled it. Again, I'm on my back, and I pulled it across my face, and I just remember thinking he was gonna like stab my eye out or something as I'm doing this, but I was able
dude,
to
that's
pull
making me
pull the
cringe.
knife enough over that it fell out of his hand, and it fell to my left side, and then I kind of rolled over it and tucked it underneath me so that he didn't have access to it anymore.
And so once you've kind of tucked the knife under your body, rolled onto it, does he stop fighting with you, or does he still
No.
keep trying to get the knife?
No, he was still slamming my head to the floor, and because
Bro,
and
this
he
chick's
would reach
survival
down with
instincts
his
are
hand and he
insane.
would try and like fish for the knife real quick, but then I would try to get up, and then he would hold me back down again, and then kind of just back and forth, like trying to fish for the knife, and I'd get up, and he'd try to fish for the knife, and then he'd push me back down. And there was a point when he had gotten really pissed off because I was kind of holding the knife with my arm as it's tucked under me, and he reached down and he bit me on the forearm here to try and get the knife loose from my grasp.
Is that the only place he bit you?
No. Shortly after that, after he fished a couple more times for the knife and couldn't get it, he reached down and he bit me twice on the side of my left cheek to try and get me to let go.
And throughout all of this, are you screaming and yelling for help, asking him to stop, putting up resistance?
Yes.
So does the fight sort of end at some point?
Yeah, so we didn't live that far from the hospital and stuff, and as the neighbors were, I later found out they were on the phone with 911 at the time. We could hear sirens coming. You could hear them coming from around the corner, not too far away, and when we both heard the sirens, that's when he got up off of me and ran back in the house.
And what did you do?
I got up and I grabbed the knife so he couldn't get it back again, and I couldn't see very clearly because my contacts were in, but they were all like covered in blood. But I ran across the street to the voices of the neighbors who were telling me to come over there, come here. And then I proceeded to go across the street and I collapsed on my back in their front yard.
Like Kay, police found Michelle lying in her neighbor's yard after being bitten, beaten, and stabbed multiple times. Michelle was lucky to survive the attack. However, she had to spend 5 days in intensive care. A detective, Matthew Kronbach, who investigated the crime scene, said it was as close to a homicide as you could get without it being a homicide. For his violent acts towards Michelle, Matthew was charged with attempted murder. After being arrested for attacking Michelle, Matthew contacted an old friend to testify for him in court. That old friend was a woman he had dated nearly 20 years earlier. Her name was Kay Baker. Kay was more than happy to testify and stand up for her friend's character in court. She told the judge, "Matthew is very truthful and I trust him completely." Michelle tried desperately to get Kay to see the monster that Matthew truly was. During the trial, Michelle sent Kay photos of her stab wounds through Facebook Messenger and said, "Please don't let this be you." But Kay could only see the man she knew Matthew to be back in those days 20 years prior when they dated. Kay was not the only one defending Matthew. He had many friends and family in the courtroom supporting him. They all just glared and shook their heads as Michelle spoke in court. Somehow, Matthew's lawyer convinced the jury that his attack on Michelle was in self-defense. He further explained, being an ex-Marine, Matthew used his training to neutralize the fight that Michelle had started. Matthew was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison for assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. In a letter written to the Michigan Parole Board, Michelle said, "If he gets out, I fear for myself and my family, and for the next victim. Society is in danger." Michelle's warnings fell on deaf ears, and Matthew served only 3 years before being discharged in December of 2021. Matthew was released on good behavior and had passed a domestic violence class. Matthew stayed in touch with Kay during those 3 years he spent in prison. After he was released, he moved to Florida to begin a new life with her. All seemed to be going well until the dreadful morning of May the 28th shined a light on what was going on behind closed doors. Matthew claimed he was not guilty of hurting or killing his girlfriend, Kay. However, prosecutors believe Matthew murdered her in a jealous rage because he believed that she had danced with another man while they were at the bar. After Kay's murder, investigator Krumbach, who was part of the team who investigated the crime scene after Matthew's attack on Michelle, told The Times that Matthew Terry was a textbook case of an evil, narcissistic, manipulative killer. The trial between Matthew Terry and the state of Florida began in November of 2022. Prosecutors worked hard to convince the jury that Matthew was responsible for the death of Kay Baker and wanted Matthew to receive the death penalty. They believed Matthew had also tried to take his own life after murdering Kay. That's why he was found with multiple cuts on his throat. Matthew's lawyers tried to convince the jury that Matthew and Kay had been attacked by an intruder who Matthew was unable to identify, and this perpetrator escaped out a window. Matthew's attorneys claimed that deputies gave up the chase too quickly. They assumed that Matthew was the killer immediately and therefore allowed the real killer to get away.
That's crazy.
Since the murder weapon was never recovered, Matthew's lawyers tried to downplay the size of the missing knife from the kitchen, the bird's beak knife, to state the knife's inability to do the damage that was done to Kay.
Now, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the knives. You said you actually looked and you're the one who found that there was that one bird's beak knife missing, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So that one bird's beak knife was the only one missing?
Out of the butcher block? Yes, ma'am.
And that is what we call a paring knife. It's a little curved knife, right?
Yes, ma'am.
There were a bunch of steak knives there, right?
Outside of the kitchen, or the block in the drawer?
Either in the block itself or outside of the block. There were a bunch of steak knives, right?
Yes.
A bunch of big knives too, right?
Yes.
And the one that we're talking about is a little itty bitty small paring knife, and that's the only one that was missing from the home, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any idea if that ever even existed in the year prior?
I cannot tell you that.
Thank you.
Matthew's attorneys fought hard to keep the previous case between Matthew and Michelle out of the current case, knowing how damaging it would be for the jury to know about Matthew's violent history. They didn't, however, get their way. Michelle was brought in to testify, and she shared the assault that she had suffered at the hands of Matthew back in 2017, which possibly played a major role in the jury's decision. Within only an hour and 10 minutes, the jury unanimously convicted Terry on a charge of first-degree murder and sentenced him not to death, but to life in prison.
But based on what I heard, I believe that
this is in
you should have
2023.
been in prison in Michigan and that Miss Baker should still be alive. This is Florida. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. I adjudicate you guilty. I sentence you to life in prison. I impose all fines, fees, associated charges, and I advise you that you have 30 days to appeal the judgment and sentence entered against you. Thank you.
It's just a man parking his SUV in the lot of a small-town motel. Nothing out of the ordinary. The middle-aged man seems to be concerned with the appearance of his vehicle, taking extra care to polish it a bit here and there. He certainly doesn't seem to have a care in the world as he walks away. That's actually quite amazing, since the man, Daniel Prince of Bostic, North Carolina, had just brutally murdered an 80-year-old woman less than an hour before. No one who would have seen him walking down the street to another nearby parking lot would have any idea that a serial killer was casually moving among them, satisfied with his kill, and enjoying a warm, sunny day in South Carolina. No one would have suspected that he was on his way to put that woman's body in a shallow grave in the mountains of North Carolina. This was at least his fourth kill, and thanks to some carelessness on his part, it would be his last. Come with us as we look into the diabolical case of serial killer Daniel Prince.
Serial killers have walked by
you tell him to turn that off,
without even knowing.
More freely.
Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Edna Suttles and the other victims discovered in this devastating case.
Yeah, 25 points. So pay attention.
The date was August 27, 2021, in the small town of Travelers Rest near the border between North and South Carolina, a scenic rural area in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. This Greenville County, South Carolina location is a quiet, out-of-the-way place, and it made a perfect hunting ground for 59-year-old Daniel Prince. Prince, working as a handyman, had been employed by Edna Suttles to do some work on her home.
Edna.
A repair or two here or there, and a relationship between them developed, a friendship that brought Prince into her realm of trust. An 80-year-old retired businesswoman and the owner of A1 Freedom Bail Bonding, Edna was a fixture in the community, vibrant and active. She took care to check up on and assist a number of elderly people in her community as well. On this very morning, she was scheduled to sit with a homebound friend, a friend whose family was counting on her that day. Edna left her home that morning but never showed up at her intended destination.
Greenville County 911, what's the location of your emergency?
The thing is, a fitter was supposed to show up to be with my mom today, and she's in her 80s, and she didn't show up. We've come to her house.
Dreams.
And we can't get nobody to the door or anything. Her name is Edna Suttles. Vic's not like her. She shows up like clockwork. So something's wrong.
In almost all jurisdictions, there's an unspoken rule that a competent adult is generally not considered missing until they've been out of contact for at least 24 hours. Very recently, however, the Greenville County Sheriff's Office had decided to change that policy.
Initially, from a sheriff's office
So remember when you were whining earlier, Rocky, and I said you weren't coming back in?
Report by phone.
Now is that time.
The Suttles case.
You ain't coming in, boy.
And the Suttles case was kind of in time with that, if you will, where we were going to respond to every missing person. Usually it was, there had to be some extenuating circumstances, some type of medical issue.
Members of the sheriff's office were dispatched to make a wellness check on Suttles, but could get no answer at the door of her home. After obtaining a warrant, they entered the property. Inside, they did not find her, any evidence of foul play, or any clues as to her whereabouts. Her vehicle was not at the residence. That vehicle, a champagne-colored Jeep Grand Cherokee, would prove to be the starting point of suspicions that something terrible may have befallen the woman.
Miss Suttles was pretty well known in the northern part of this county. She was a bail bonding agent. She was a tough lady, street smart, had a great reputation here in our area. She was certainly nobody's fool.
Edna was gone. The police put out alerts through all the local media. They described her vehicle, gave its license plate number, and warned that she could be in need of immediate medical attention. They could not have known that Edna had already been killed and taken across a nearby state line. It was 7 days before the Jeep was found by an officer of a local police department on September 3rd in the parking lot of the Best Western Hotel in the town of Travelers Rest. The Jeep had been backed into a parking space, concealing the license plate from anyone just driving through the lot. After determining that Edna had not checked into the hotel, members of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office scanned the hotel's security footage for the day of the disappearance. They found what they were looking for: footage of the Jeep being driven into the parking lot, and the person who got out was definitely not Edna Suttles. A man got out of the car and then began to wipe it down, paying particular attention to the inside of the front seat passenger's door and then the door frame and quarter panels. He left and then came back quickly to give it one more wipe down, and then he walked away, leaving the property. Any number of missing persons cases turn out to have nothing sinister about them. Some are just a person taking a short trip without telling anyone. Sometimes it can come from a mental health crisis. Sometimes just a romantic rendezvous that ran a little long. At this moment, though, investigators realized that any pretense of Suttles willfully being out of touch with those that she knew was probably gone. This missing persons case had taken a serious and unsettling turn. Investigators now had to determine who the mysterious man was and what happened prior to the 1:46 p.m. timestamp on the security video. There were hours still unaccounted for from that morning when Suttles presumably left her home to visit and sit with a friend. In this day and age, security cameras are nearly everywhere, and investigators began searching for the pieces of the puzzle that was unfolding before them. Now, with a date and time to work backwards from, it was a matter of finding the footage and canvassing locations in the small town until they could pick up a trail. Working diligently, law enforcement was able to piece together video from around the area that gave a timeline for the day's events. At 9:22 a.m. on the morning of August 27, 2021, a security camera video shows a Chevrolet Cruze pull into the parking lot at a Food Lion supermarket in Travelers Rest, South Carolina. Just 8 minutes later, at 9:30 a.m., Edna Suttles drives away from her home in her champagne-colored Jeep Grand Cherokee. Security camera footage from a nearby antique store showed the time of departure and initial direction of travel. At 9:38 a.m., a man matching the appearance of the individual spotted leaving her Jeep at the Best Western purchases a pack of strawberry yogurt cups at Food Lion. The man uses the store rewards card, and investigators now had his name, identifying him as Daniel Prince. A minute later, Edna Suttles pulls into the grocery store parking lot and parks her vehicle near Prince's. Footage shows Prince holding a grocery bag and gesturing to Suttles. He then goes to his own car and retrieves a small bag. He gets into the front passenger seat of Suttles' Jeep. Minutes later, the Jeep leaves the parking lot with the pair inside. 4 hours pass before there was any more video evidence. Then, at 1:43 p.m., Suttles' Jeep is seen driving away from her residence back in the direction of the Food Lion supermarket. Minutes later, at 2:02 p.m., the Jeep pulls into a different part of the parking lot than before. Prince is shown exiting the Jeep from the driver's side door and walking across the parking lot to the Chevy Cruze he had arrived in. Prince then moves his Cruze alongside the Jeep in the parking lot, front passenger door to front passenger door. He gets out and moves something from one vehicle to the other. A closer analysis shows that it is a person with the starkly blonde hair of Suttles. Prince then drives Suttles' Jeep away, and the blonde-haired person is left unmoving inside of Prince's car. 5 minutes later, Prince parks the car at the Best Western parking lot, wipes it down, and walks back in the direction of the Food Lion parking lot. At 2:14 p.m., Prince gets back into his Chevy Cruze with the unmoving Suttles and drives away. The trail of video evidence goes cold from there, but Prince's purchase led right to his door. The rewards card information provided an address in Bostic, North Carolina, about 70 miles away in the rural area of Rutherford County, North Carolina. So, who was this man, Daniel Glenn Prince? What connection could he have with Edna, and how did he come to meet with her on that fateful day? A native of Michigan, Prince had moved to the North Carolina mountains a few years before, making his home in one of the many hollers in Rutherford County. It's a friendly place, but one where a person who might want privacy is apt to find plenty of it. Prince and his wife, KK, settled in, and he began working as a handyman, often for elderly single or widowed ladies. He had a knack for the work and also for developing relationship with those women, gaining their trust and befriending them. Prince, however, harbored a troubled past, one that he didn't bring up. As a youth, he had joined the military to get away from a life that was leading him down the wrong path. The stint in the military was short-lived, as was his avoidance of a life of crime. His criminal record showed charges of assault and battery as well as firearms violations. Most disturbing was his conviction in Michigan in 1997 for kidnapping a woman. He was sentenced to 13 to 30 years in prison for the crime and served 12 years of that sentence before being paroled. His parole was terminated 2 years later, and he moved out of the state not long after that before ending up in North Carolina. Detectives now had not just videos and a timeline, but they had the name of a man with a history of kidnapping. Quickly, the Greenville County Sheriff's Department contacted their counterparts in the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department just across the state line. Probable cause for auto theft had been established at the very least, and a warrant to arrest Prince and search his property was quickly granted. The Rutherford County Sheriff was more than willing to assist in serving that warrant. Prince surrendered with remarkable calm to the large number of heavily armed officers who had arrived at his property.
Totally cooperating, just relax. Not doing anything, and I'll cooperate. Am I good? Stand up on your feet. Stay right there. Yeah. Sir, I will be very cooperative. All right, let's try that, please. So.
Prince was quickly taken into custody and on to the Rutherford County Sheriff's Department, where he was initially interviewed. It was obvious from the beginning that Prince wanted to run the interview and control the narrative. He was arrogant and seemed unfazed by what was happening, so investigators let him talk.
I'll talk to you about August 27th, 2021 this year.
What day of the week was that?
Oh, it was a Friday.
Okay.
Where are you on that day? What's your typical Fridays like?
Some Fridays I go do jobs, some Fridays I stay home, some Fridays I go look at jobs, I do all sorts of things. Days run together for me because I don't have a set schedule.
Fair enough. As the jobs come, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so specifically the 27th.
Mm-hmm.
What, 2 weeks ago? Do you remember where you were at?
Not specifically.
Where do you think you were at?
I've been going all over the place. I've been back and forth to Charlotte. I've been down to South Carolina.
Yeah. Like, where's your jobs in South Carolina taking you?
Actually, I was down to Travelers Rest, but I don't know if it was Friday or Thursday. I know I'd been there earlier that week.
Okay. But you don't remember which day specifically?
No, it was either Thursday or Friday.
What kind of job were you working on?
I wasn't.
You wasn't?
I wasn't. This lady had talked to me several times. I'd been down to her house 2 or 3 times. We kind of got to be friends. This woman has so many damn problems, mostly her daughter.
Yeah.
And what she did is she had me looking at ductwork that she wanted done because somebody had done ductwork for her and she was suing them because they didn't do all the ductwork or something. She would call me and have me come down there.
Okay.
And she was constantly having problems. She said she needed to have money at one point in time to help her daughter because her daughter was in jail. Then she needed money another time because...
We're almost to level 98.
What was it the next time? She was hiring a private investigator because her son-in-law she talked to me all kinds of stuff about it. We got to be pretty good friends about stuff like that. But she kept seeing like she was blowing me off by actually doing any work for her. She was going to have a guy come out and wash her house, and I said, well, if I'm coming down here to look at other stuff, I got a power washer. I can wash your house and clean out your eaves for a couple $100. She was going to have me do it. Packed my power washer up. Went down there. Never did the work because I don't have the money right now. I got to sell a bunch of jewelry. I got to sell a bunch of stuff to go ahead and get more money for a private investigator. Then she wanted a different private investigator because she didn't like the one she had. So it was like one excuse after the other.
How'd you meet her initially?
Years ago.
Okay.
Years ago, it was somebody had given me her name or number, or my name and number. I get passed around a lot.
Okay.
So it was a years ago thing.
That's pretty awesome. Your name made all the way down to Travelers Rest, South Carolina. That's good reputation.
Yeah.
Solid work. All right, so
why are we?
What you're telling us is that's not you on the 27th. Food Line parking lot, Travelers Rest.
I don't think so.
That's not you.
That's me. Where's that?
Food Line, August 27th, 2021, 9:23.
Okay.
22 seconds. Ringing a bell?
Yep. Yeah, I went down to Food Line. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what were you doing down there that day?
She wanted me to look at some stuff at her house.
Okay.
And she picked me up at Food Line because she wanted me with her when she was gonna go meet some guy for God dang it, private investigator.
Okay, yeah. Tell us about that.
She wanted me to meet her down there.
Okay.
She was nervous because she says, I'm not sure I trust this guy. And she knows I've been in the military. And she says, will you meet me? And I go, yeah. And I said, where do you want to meet? She says, well, he's been talking to me. I guess I'm supposed to meet him at a restaurant. And I'm supposed to meet him down near Food Lion.
Okay.
So I went down to Food Lion, and she met me. And he didn't show up where we went to next. And she had been trying to get a hold of him. And we went to her house for about 2 hours. And then we went back to Food Lion. And
She just dropped you off and you went home and you just noticed something about PI?
Well, she wanted me to see if this guy was going to meet her where he was supposed to meet her.
Do you know where?
There was a hotel lobby that he had finally said, meet me at the hotel.
Okay.
She says, drive up there and see if he's there. And I drove up there, and things are starting to sound really squirrely to me. And then she finally said, just drop me off at home. And if you drop me off at home, my daughter will pick me up. And I said, because I got to get going. I can't be doing this all day.
So that's y'all coming down 25, you and her together? Back towards the hotel?
It could be.
Okay, because that's their car. That's about 1345 on the 27th.
Okay.
So you're with her there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah.
I'm not saying yeah. I'm just saying that could be your.
Yeah, here's a different angle, but
Yeah,
I mean, we watched
badly.
this
Yeah,
car.
that's alright.
Right.
Okay. You'll survive.
Here's y'all in the hotel parking lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh look. There's y'all backing in.
Yep.
Yeah, a couple of different copies of it. Backing in.
Yeah.
Oh look. You get out. Nobody else gets out.
I told you that.
You're walking around the car.
Yeah.
You wipe the entire car down.
Because I was worried.
You were worried. There's you walking across the parking lot in front of Little Caesars.
Mm-hmm.
And there's you getting back into your car and driving away.
Oh, she's with me.
Look, man. Where's that?
What do you, I don't have a clue.
We need to know. Listen, Dan. Okay? You are a good dude. I honestly do believe that you screwed up years and years ago.
Okay.
And now.
Can I look at these?
What?
I just want to look and see what you're talking about.
Let's
Fuck, man, I'm gonna go to bed, chat. I'm so tired right now. Like falling asleep here. Sorry, boys. Streaming tomorrow for sure. See you guys then. Peace out. Oh, fuck. Ugh.